I call this meeting of the Cleveland Heights University Heights City School District to order. Would you please call the roll?
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Posh?
Here.
Mr. Hines?
Here.
Ms. Serini?
Here.
Ms. Lewis?
Here.
Thank you. We have a consent agenda in front of us regarding personnel items that was shared with us previously. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second. Any discussions about these? They were presented to us in advance.
Nope.
For our review. Sunday mornings by some. Vacation by others. Would you please call the vote?
Mr. Posh?
Yes?
Mr. Hines?
Yes.
Ms. Serini?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
So we have a couple things. Business item first regarding the middle schools. Want to share with us what you have?
Great, thank you. Yeah, we have a request for 2 change orders this evening. I have a brief presentation to go over and see if there's any questions. And then Jack Kellogg from Turner can give a kind of an update of the construction progress with some photos. Okay? So the change orders that we have tonight are 6 in for Monticello and 3 are for Roxborough. The change order for Monticello includes door replacements and some door frames that we have basically in corridors and stairwells. And when we started the project, the intention was for the district to try to get those repaired. It was a larger scope, so we decided that we were going to put it into the project as a change order. So both of these, for Roxborough and for Monticello, are basically their egress stairs, and basically they needed to be replaced, door hardware and doors, and in some cases frames, so we have safer conditions for egress. Monticello also includes the composition floor replacement. If you remember, a few months ago, we actually had found that composition floors had hazardous material. They needed to come out. So that was step 1. Step 2 is to replace that. So now we have the pricing for that, and we can go over some of the details.
Are these the floor surfaces that look like they're chipped out by a jackhammer?
Exactly, yes. Yeah, I have these photographs here to show. So the first step was actually the cost to have them removed because they were hazardous materials, and then this is the cost to actually come back with a composite fill that basically can be self-leveling, also meet all the bonding strengths that we'll need to have so that we can replace that as a kind of a structural / underlayment for the new floors.
So there was a couple things regarding the floors, just so the first issue was removing was there asbestos? I mean, I think there was.
It was composition floors and they had asbestos containing materials in it.
And that decision is behind us.
That's done.
There was other issues, I thought, with the floors. Is this the last issue? regarding the floors?
So this issue is associated with the removal of the composition floors. Then we had the area over the gymnasium with the science classrooms and the music classroom, and those areas we're getting some pricing on, and those will probably handle through allowance.
Okay, so this change order does not include the structural repairs for the ceiling of the gym, floor of the science classroom. That's going to be a separate
That's correct.
line. Okay,
Yes.
And that's the one that's above the stage?
Yes.
Well,
the gym.
gym,
The gym.
okay. Yeah,
Yes.
I think of it as the stage, but you're right, it's the gym too.
Yes. And as part of this change, we do have allowances within the project. This exceeded anything that we had anticipated. That's why we're asking for a change order for it. But we also are kicking in some of the project allowances to handle some of the costs as they come up. These are some photographs associated with it. And then a summary for the costs that we have, so we can see. I've increased the owner contingency based on the kitchen ads that we had. So right now, we're forecasting, with the items forecasted, pending, and executed, we have approximately $267,000 of remaining owner contingency for Monticello. And for Roxborough, we have approximately $837,000.
stair doors and hardware. I remember that there were a couple of things going on. There was the doors and the hardware, and then there was a discussion about, wasn't there also a discussion about the height and the doorways going to the ceiling?
Yes.
Is this all in the same change order?
So some of those changes we've already had approved, where we had, at the stairwells, basically the partitions did not extend, so they did not meet the fire rating.
Right.
So we have that work. We actually have the masons
In the
already
previous
out
change
there
order,
that are
right?
bringing that up. We have some areas that are going to require some rated partitions that are going to be constructed, and then these requests are basically for the door frames and the door replacements.
And the doors that we're talking about, do we have an image of what sort of door we're looking at? Is there?
I don't really have photographs of that. They are located basically at the stairwells.
Yeah.
And then in some of the corridors where we have the double doors. So it actually includes some removable mullions, so if we get furniture and everything else through the corridors.
Will these be, in general terms, are these sort of institutional metal doors, or are these something that's going to be a little bit more add to the aesthetic?
Yeah, with them being fire-rated doors, they actually do have lights, the windows in them.
Mhm.
And they have those in the fire safety glasses in them, so they're not just a solid institutional door. They're kind of softer with the lights and the viewing, so that as people are on the other side and they're opening the door and everything else.
More similar to what we see at Heights High, would you say?
Probably, yes.
Okay.
And exactly how many doors are you?
At Monticello, there are 32 doors in hardware and 8 frames. And then at Roxborough, there are 29 doors in hardware. And then, like I said, some of them are double doors, and they have a mullion that can come out. And so this cost.
Central
mullion
post
is a
between the two
separator,
doors,
right, got it.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, and so this cost includes the demolition, the materials for the doors, the hardware, the installation of the doors and the hardware, the installation of the glass.
Okay.
And then the markup for the contractors.
Of course.
Right.
Okay. Do you have a sense of when we'll have pricing for that floor ceiling at Monty with the structural work that has to be done?
We're working very hard on that, and we're actually hoping that we can get that in under allowance costs. So we're hoping that that's not going to be a change request.
So
That would be nice.
I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yeah.
One of the things that I was very impressed, and one of the reasons to me that touring the work sites is valuable for the Bond Accountability Commission, is I saw an area where different products had been used and tried for the floor resurfacing. And I was really kind of impressed that we went to those lengths and just to find out which product is going to work best for these applications. And some, obviously a decision's been made that this one that we've picked is the one. My question to you, though, is some of these areas being as high traffic as they are, what if we get, and this may be just a general sort of warranty sort of a question, what if we get a few years out and it turns out these things are not, the binding, they're popping up, that sort of stuff. Tell me about what's the general warranty, if you will, of the product and the labor and all that.
Typical warranty is 1 year on labor and material. The product, we requested pricing from 4 subs, and we actually got 3 subs who priced it up. 2 of them priced up 2 alternatives each, so we actually got 5 different prices. And the system that we selected was reviewed by the structural engineer, and he was concerned that there has to be good bonding.
Right.
And the process is, clean it, vacuum it, put the bonding material down. So we sent him all the cut sheets, he's reviewed it, he's comfortable with it, so I feel like we made a good selection as far as a product that will bond properly and, hopefully forestall or prevent those kind of problems.
What's the flooring going to be that goes over this once it's down and level?
Typically, the hallways are VCT, vinyl composition tile.
So if what's underneath them is giving out, those will pop up.
Well, you're going to see a lot more in VCT, right? So if this was carpet, it would have been a different
Right.
solution, maybe a less expensive solution, but since it's VCT, we have to do something that's more durable.
I see.
I could follow up with other warranties that are on here, some of the product information I have, it doesn't have that listed. But as Jack said, we did go through an extensive exercise to find the appropriate material, and actually, the structural engineer actually rejected one of the alternates for those same concerns.
No, I was thrilled that it was as thoughtfully done as it was.
And there's a section which is a ramp, and that's different material, if I read correctly, than the stuff that remains level, right? That's going to be...
Right.
Because it has to do different things.
Yes.
Okay, and will that ramp also get a covering of some sort? That section?
VCT.
Also, okay. Good.
So I'm looking at slides 8 and 9, basically the two change management slides that you have. And there's a couple things that we're still waiting for pricing on. And I think I was a little surprised to hear the tunnel conversation. Not surprised, I think we're all surprised that we have some
Right.
surprises, okay? But, so we have the tunnel between the two wings at Rocks.
Right.
I mean, we're getting to a point where I'm starting to worry about our contingencies. I think we all are.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yes, we are.
We'd be foolish if we weren't. But we don't even have an estimate on how we're going to deal with that one yet. Do you have any?
We have an approach, and we had, Turner had prepared actually 3 different alternatives with different estimates, and they probably ranged in the $150,000 range, but we're vetting those out with the engineers. And that's another one where we're looking at the allowances that we have within Roxborough to try to be able to manage it within that.
So when you say allowances, those are basically outside of the contingency, so you have an allowance for.
As we prepared the GMP, we knew that we were going to find some items, there were going to be some scope in, and it's normal with the CMR that there are allowances that are built in. So those are built into the project, and we intend on managing and using all of those so that the owner contingency is kept as intact, because we are also concerned about unforeseen items that we had.
And again, what's CMR? CMR.
Construction manager at risk.
Okay.
That's the kind of contract that we have with Turner.
We also, I don't see anything here for the seal and tile work at Rocks, or an estimate for that. Is that also something that you can pull out of?
The ceiling, that was for the cafeteria ceiling work?
Right.
Yes, that's another item that we should be able to get some pricing on. Yep.
I think it'd be real helpful. I know we need to go forward with this. This is a typical use of
Right.
contingency funds. I mean, I think it would be really helpful to have some of those numbers the next time around.
Okay,
I would imagine you would anyways, because we're getting farther down
yes.
we're getting down the project.
Can you refresh my memory, what is the tunnel repairs? So there is a tunnel in the basement, if you will, in between the old and the new wings of Rocks by the
Yes.
gymnasium stairs.
Yeah, and it's actually under the drive that goes in between, those wings.
Is it, so there's a little walkway, door to door. Is it directly underneath that?
Yes.
Okay.
When you go in the door, there's stairs that go
Mhm.
down, and you can get into a
To the
tunnel
old weight room.
/crawl space to come across.
So describe the tunnel to me.
The tunnel is probably maybe 5 foot high, and it had steam lines
Okay.
and gas lines and electrical lines going through it. And over the years, there have been water leaks and structures corroded, and there's concerns from Turner and from the construction, from the engineer, that we need to do some kind of repair for it. So preliminary, we took a look at, do we infill the tunnel with the new work that we're doing? Do we need the tunnel? Can we put in some duct banks? Do we need to put a new cap on it? Do we need to replace the tunnel? What's the approach for it? Right now, what we're looking at is replacing the cap on it and actually fortifying it structurally so we can make it all safe, and doing that immediately, and then in the spring, come back and address some of the water issues that we have. There was, the asphalt drive that was put in has created a condition where all the water's sloping towards the school, so that's creating a water condition. We're going to have to try to repair that, and there's other repairs that we need to do.
There's a downspout there that's also, we've talked about it before, that we saw that when we toured, there's a downspout going nowhere. It's just, and so that's one of the things that we picked up on. So is this something that, first of all, is it currently in use? Are there still steam pipes there that are being used, or can we, if we wanted to, fill it?
Yeah, we've looked at that. We can fill it. There are some other concerns as we got in with the structural engineer as far as not knowing exactly the bearing capacity of the soil below it. So that if we add all that extra weight, then do we need to do further testing and everything else? So right now, what they're kind of looking at is taking what we can see and what we know, and then building from there.
So let's say that we did nothing. Would the building be certified? As
Right,
is?
we'll need to do something. It's a structural safety concern that's been brought to our attention that we're going to have to address.
We have to do that now?
Yeah. So now it's a matter, so actually, the last that we were looking at, and still, it's preliminary, that's why we haven't brought it to you, but it's, we're looking at actually doing some pours for, basically being able to put some new structure reinforcement in there, put some new bearing beams in place, and then possibly build a new cap and waterproof it.
Do I remember you mentioning that there are active water lines running through that tunnel that we need? Because the steam will be obsolete,
It's going to
but,
be abandoned. Yeah,
but water and electricity, I assume we still need, right?
Yeah, and we do have water, I think we have gas, and power. And those, if we were gonna fill it, we could do a duct bank and we could treat it that way. It's just, right now, it's structurally, we're kind of, the whole team's still working together to figure out the best way to address it.
But if you put supports in there, you're still going to need to test and potentially replace what's below those. You got to have something solid that
The
those are
structural engineer is
resting on.
confident that he can distribute it appropriately, the manner that it's actually like it's similar to a spread footing, but it's more of a curb that they're looking at building, that they have some confidence that they'll be able to go ahead and do that without the additional testing.
Well, I mean, I think at this point, let's get some actual numbers. This is obviously a work in progress.
Right.
You know, from what I heard in our tour and what I'm hearing tonight, you got good people on this. So let's find out their result. And then give us the opportunity. I mean, it'll come to us anyways, I would imagine.
Yeah, this is the first I've heard of it, so that's.
So I got to tell you, it was really, really extremely good use of, I thought, my time jumping on the tour at Monticello, and I can't wait to find that
Roxborough.
opportunity for Roxborough.
Yep.
So I know I've
November
seen some
7th, right?
use.
Isn't that when we're going?
November 7th.
Right.
November 7th?
So
Okay,
we get to do the same thing at Rocks Middle.
yeah, so that would be really worth the time. What time on the 7th?
4 o'clock, I believe, is the tour, and then
Closed toe shoots, Jim.
BAC meeting following that.
November 4th.
No,
No.
November 7th.
November
At 4.
7th.
Good, okay. I didn't think you had planned a meeting on the Sunday. but- Do you have anything else to present regarding this issue?
Jack has an update and some photos for the construction status.
I do have a quick question before you flip off of that presentation. The last slide at the bottom where you have project duration, and you have 15 months, remaining months is 9, and according to this, we've used 40% of the contingency, so we have 60% left. Is that accurate?
We have, right now, let me blow this up, excuse me.
Yeah, it's the bottom line there.
Yeah.
So for this is to
that's
kind of
time
show,
remaining.
it's, whoops, excuse me. So we can compare the costs for the hard costs that we spent for both projects right now, it's 55%. And then we have 60% remaining for the construction duration.
So the
Okay.
60% is time,
Yeah, so that's a
55.5%
comparison
is
of.
How
money.
much
Yeah.
money? Okay, so my
So
question.
it's not a direct correlation, but it's kind of a rule of thumb that we like to just check to make sure.
Right, right, and that's my question.
Yes.
The rule of thumb is, how is that based on where we are in the project compared to other typical projects? Is that low, high, medium, as far as the 55% remaining of contingency when you're 60% of the way through your project?
Yeah, it's pretty much balanced out. I mean, it can almost be a straight line. So it's okay with where we're at as far as forecasting ahead. You know, because we don't know when all of those items are going to come out and everything. If we're 2 months and then we've spent and we're down to 30% left, then that's when we start to really get concerned.
Okay, that's what I was
Yeah.
questioning. 'cause
So, I mean, we're watching it very closely, and we're managing it very closely and all the costs, and a lot of these items, Turner, I think, is doing a really good job with negotiating with subcontractors, and if they need to watch time and materials, so that we're making sure that, you know, everything's getting covered. But that's why I added this, so that we can
Right.
all see right away. You know, soft costs, I'm not as concerned about, because most of those costs are behind us. But hard costs, and then we know we've ran into more at Monticello with hazardous materials than we have with Roxborough and stuff, you know.
Right,
And
well, I
then these
appreciate,
forecasts do include, so, you know, with the signage and some of the other things that we know we're gonna have are in here, so.
I appreciate seeing it broken out this way, so thank you. I was just wondering if this is typical to be 55% of the way through your contingency when you're 60% of the way through the project. I mean, are there some standard rules of thumb or some, like, yes, you're on, you know, on schedule, on budget when you're at this point, or, you know, where do you, I guess I'm just looking for what's kind of industry benchmarks that we can
Yeah.
compare against.
I like to always see those numbers pretty close. So if we're 60% remaining and we have 60% remaining contingency, it's a kind of a primitive check. You know, so with those two numbers being close, we're watching it. If we only had 30% remaining and we had 60% of construction left, we'd be very concerned. The reality with this project is the scope is a lot different, where it's systems. So the hazardous materials hit us really, really hard. This floor abatement, obviously. But as we get the systems in place, and then it's finishes, and Turner's already started to manage plaster drywalls, and a lot of the issues that we've seen are coming up. And then once we get into finishes, then the cost. Right now, the issues that we're finding, they're huge, they're very large issues, you know, unfortunately.
Well, you know, my big issue is with the allowances. I mean, is there adequate allowances on these things? And I guess we're not going to find that until later. but you hope that there's enough contingency to sort of balance that.
Right.
So I think the sooner we can figure these things out,
Yes.
and I think what's helpful is we're getting a lot of really good data from you in a format that I think we could all easily digest. So again, as Jody says, thank you. I mean, it's really very helpful. I just want to see where we're going to fall with some of these loose items
Right.
and if there's going to be a gap between what's in the allowances and what we feel like we really need
Right.
to do. I got to think these things have already been decided upon. I think the big unknown possibly is furniture, which is, I think, a conversation to have in the future. So.
Right.
So Jack, you had more to share with us, right? So- It's always good to get pictures.
That helps.
Hit that arrow there. Yep, makes it a little bigger.
All right. Switch with me here.
Okay, here's some photos from Monticello. So the upper left here is just one of the classrooms that's been cleaned out, and you can see that there are some penetrations through the walls for duct. The next photo is an electrical panel, so the panel back box is installed. You can see the conduit on top is running to the panel. We've even pulled wire. The next photo is a mechanical room where the water source heat pump, which is the heating and air conditioning unit, so that photo demonstrates that some of the equipment is in the building. Here's just a photo of ductwork installed in one of the rooms. And then another photo of a water source heat pump, more ductwork. This is an electrical room. You can see the transformers are installed. There's an electrical panel, back box, conduit, and then another photo with some wiring. So just gives you an idea on where we are with the mechanical installation. And the next photos are Roxborough. So upper left is just conduit run. This is a photo of some ductwork. It's pretty hard to see. Another photo of ductwork, more ductwork,
Duck.
a lot of ducts.
Duck, duck, goose.
This is the rough end for one of the bathrooms. You can see we removed the flooring here where the old fixtures used to sit. We've opened up the wall and we've installed the new plumbing and these are the sanitary and vent lines. Here's a photo of just electrical conduit. Another photo of duct. You can get a feel for how tightly the duct is packed, and then an electrical room. So those are the photos for the schools. Overall, we're on schedule for completion. Right now, we're working through a lot of the mechanical, electrical, plumbing work. We started finishes. We did the plaster patching on the walls at Monticello. You saw that. They pretty much finished at Monticello, so now the crew's at Roxborough. We started masonry at Monticello, do some of the top of wall, and the crew on the past couple of days left Monticello and headed over to Roxborough. And then we started drywall, framing for drywall at both schools. So we're kind of transitioning away from the demo. We still have a little bit more to do. We're working on mechanical, electrical, plumbing, rough in, and then obviously framing, and then we're going to get going with drywall.
The ductwork that we see in the ceiling, that's going to be above the dropped ceilings, right? So that won't be
Yep.
visible.
I was just amazed about how torn apart
Mhm.
the buildings were in the demo and how extensive
Yeah.
this work is. Even when you walk by the buildings and there's not to the stage of the high school, but pretty darn close.
Yeah,
Really
there's a
amazing.
sense that this isn't a big project, that this is, a tiny little project compared to the high schools, but boy, you sure don't get that sense when you're in those buildings now. All the floors are pulled up and out, all the ceilings, many of the walls. These are major overhauls.
The last time I was in Monticello, it still had all the stuff in it,
Mhm.
and I just can't believe
Yeah.
it's gone. That was huge labor of effort. Even in the media center,
Mhm.
it's just
Yeah.
big space. You guys are done with your, so we need a motion to approve these.
I motion that we approve the change orders in front of us.
Is there a second?
A second.
Does anybody have any other questions or thoughts? Would you call the vote, please?
Ms. Lewis,
Yes.
Ms. Wright,
Yes.
Mr. Posh,
Yes.
Mr. Hines,
Yes.
Ms. Serini.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, we have financial presentation.
Financial presentation. I'm going to move over into the hot seat.
Are in the hot seat and all by yourself.
Always in the hot
Yes.
seat, yes.
Excited about this one, Scott.
Did we ever tell you we really wish that you gave this to us more often?
Tell him his wish is coming true,
Your
right?
wish is
It's
coming true.
true.
Well, I think what's helpful, though, I mean, I think from a board perspective is, at least the 5-year forecast, you've shared some key stuff with us. I think there's clearly updates that you're about to share.
But one of the things we wanted to make sure too is that the board, we want to get on a presentation cycle from finance. So they were coming in the fall and coming in the spring. Yeah, so when it gets time to approve in the spring, you know that you're getting ready to see what we have set forthcoming for the next year and how we plan to expend our dollars. So it's something that Scott committed to doing, and so today, even though we've already approved the budget for this year, we wanted to give you an update on what it looks like and then have some news to share at the end.
And since we promised it would not be a boring presentation tonight,
You brought cookies.
you will notice that you have toys there
Yes.
with you. Okay, so you have a paddle.
Yours is red.
Everyone should have a paddle with a marker.
I don't have one.
Oh, yes, you do.
Yes, you do.
This person over here.
And
That's for you.
you also have an extra,
Can't we just have food?
you have an extra pen and you have a dry erase marker there if you need it. Because the way we want to do this,
Yours is red.
Yes, we are.
yes, we are. And so we have Dr.
never
Lombardo
ends.
to thank for this. He brought this format to a cabinet presentation.
meeting, yes.
And so we thought this would be an interesting and fun way to discuss some of the finance items that we have. So you see that is
And it is a work session.
correct. So you got to work.
This is work.
It's a
Notice
parody.
this part of the meeting?
So it is a parody because we don't want any copyright infringement issues. And rather than get into a full kind of run the board and all that good stuff situation, you're going to see it's a Jeopardy board. Give you an opportunity to write any answers or questions to the answers that you see, if you choose to, or if you don't have to. But if you do know the answers and you want to write them on your board at each time, and we'll just go round robin so that everyone can choose a category and a dollar amount. And that way, hopefully, we'll touch on some concepts that we've talked about, but we want to kind of reinforce, but also some concepts that, for example, I know you, Malia, went to a school finance workshop. You submitted a list of questions. Not to put any pressure on you that you need to know this, but
Teaching you a lesson.
but you
Yeah, I
did.
had smoke
But you did
coming out of
submit
my
some
ears after
questions.
that, you know.
So I tried to incorporate some answers and some of the
Okay.
concepts that you posed here. So
This
Here we
wasn't
go.
part of our packet, just saying.
correct.
Yeah, I know.
This was a total surprise, so we thought we'd try to do something fun. So here are today's categories. They are property taxes,
Yes.
5-year forecast, fiscal transparency, 2018-2019 budget,
That's this year.
miscellaneous school funding, and school board members. So we do have a category about with school board members, all right?
Oh, God. All right.
We will start with
moly.
Mr. Hines. Choose a category and a dollar figure, please.
Go big or go home. So I'm going to jump right to miscellaneous school funding for $400.
Oh, my, oh, my.
So this is the small number of mills that grow with inflation. Number of mills. So if you know that and you want to try to hazard a guess, feel free to write your answer. Anyone have a guess on that? Inside millage?
What is inside millage?
Inside millage.
Okay.
There we
Yes.
go, inside mills. Good job,
Okay.
all right.
Where's my eraser?
Yeah, your eraser's on.
Wait till I get the point since I didn't have it as
So
a
you-
question.
Yeah, well, we'll still get it. We're not
now
gonna
you're in
hold to
trouble,
that.
Dan.
Okay.
You didn't
are
phrase it as a
okay.
question.
All right. Ms. Wright, you have the next one.
Okay, school board members for 200.
Okay. And before we leave that, I just want to make sure that if there is a question as you hear any of the responses, really it's kind of encourage discussion. So inside millage, are there any questions on inside millage? So, there are a few mills that each district and municipality and other governmental entities have that do grow with inflation. For Heights, it's about 4.45, if I'm not mistaken, inside mills. So it's not very much, but you do get some growth from inflation. Everything else is subject to, well, that's an answer for another question.
I think it would be helpful for, at one point, we've seen like these pie charts
Mhm.
that sort of, basically cut up the pie
Mhm.
of where the property taxes go.
Yeah.
It would be good to see something like that again,
Mhm.
because I
Absolutely.
know that does change.
Yeah.
Now,
Not
remind
much,
me,
but-
the inside millage is a permanent
It is, yes. So,
tax, it's not voted on or renewed, is
that
that
is
correct?
correct.
Okay,
And,
that's what I wanted.
so, and technically, it's not subject to a vote, and I believe there's a limit to 10 mills that all the municipalities and governmental entities in that district can deal with. So we have we have our millage, and both cities have theirs, and the library may even have a little bit of inside millage in the county. So it gets a little dicey because sometimes a district or some entity will decide to increase their inside millage, not subject to vote,
And then people get upset.
and people get upset.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right,
Understandable.
I'm sorry, Ms. Wright, so we have school board members for 200. Okay, so this school board member had to serve an in-school suspension for altering the face of the Heights High Clock Tower. Care to hazard a guess on which board member that might be?
Only-
And I will tell you that all of these questions and answers were submitted by the board members, so, we're not telling tales here that,
Current board members?
current board members.
No. I think that I'm being framed. No. And that's a misunderstanding. I may know who did that, but I was not.
Well, that may have been a one, that may have happened multiple times. I don't know. So I'm just saying.
I'm afraid of heights.
Okay, so we have Mr. Hines. Dan. Beverly says who's Beverly? No answer?
Beverly, you did
All right, that is Miss Wright.
Oh, my, okay.
Vindication, by the way, vindication.
I thought for sure you had a job.
Bad girl image now.
Yes, well, right, so we know what you were really like, huh?
All right, so Miss Lewis.
Oh, goodness. Fiscal transparency for 400.
All right, fiscal transparency. So the annual summary publication that we print to keep residents informed of financial information. We have Mr. Hines with CAFR. We have the PAFR. We have a CAFR. Anyone
Oh,
else?
I put the quality profile.
Oh, see, well, so the answer we're looking for here is actually because it's the summary document rather than the details, so we're looking for the
Oh,
PAFR.
okay.
So that is correct. We do have the quality profile, which also doesn't have some financial information though, so Jody, we give you a few points for that.
And that is the one that the community said they wanted.
Right.
It's part of our
Correct.
strategic
Right.
plan that we put together.
A
and
one-pager
so-
that's-
Yep, it's a
Yep.
thin book,
Yep.
yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
but that
available-
summary is the trick question. So, aren't our teachers
So
always
it
trying to
is,
trick
it
us?
is compared to other documents, so
Yeah, there's a
That's
the
where I got
PAFR
the
is
The
summary.
CAFR is longer.
just a few pages, but it does have the charts that Jim indicated, with
Yep.
the pie chart where the money comes from.
And these are always available
Goes.
in, I think.
They're
right-
out
right
there in the
outside.
bin.
The print copies are here
Yes.
and they're on the website.
Yep.
Yeah.
So anyone can see those at any time.
And there's several copies in my filing cabinet at home.
Yeah, there you go. All right, Ms. Serini.
Oh, did we skip Miss Lewis?
No,
Or-
I just
Oh,
got
she's
That was
doing,
her.
okay,
Yes.
I am going to do school board members for 400.
Uh-oh, all right. This school board member speaks
Oh,
5
that's-
different languages.
Show off.
Miss Lewis.
Who am I?
There we go, yeah.
I'm still working on
Certainly not
warning
me.
language.
I think everyone knew that was Miss Lewis. Okay, do you want to tell, she asked me to guess, I didn't want, I mean, I assumed French for sure.
Yeah,
English?
Along with English.
English,
but
French, Spanish, Portuguese, German.
There we go.
Portuguese.
Nice.
Yeah, my
Speaking
Portuguese
Italian.
actually was not half bad when I was a teenager on the beach.
All right.
All right, Mr. Posh.
How about property taxes for 100?
Oh,
Taxes
my.
for 100.
Always wanting to lighten
Here's
things up
so
there.
the unit of measurement for a property tax levy. Correct, is a mill. Yes.
And
Nicely
for those,
done.
for those at home, and since you probably do it twice a week, give us the nickel description of a mill.
Mill is $1 per thousand. So, you know, and that's, so typically it's expressed, like our last levy was 5.5 mils, which would have brought, I won't try to do the calculation in my head, but it's $1 per thousand of taxable value of your home.
And when,
And taxable value is significantly less than assessed value.
Correct.
and it does not go up
gonna be
when
5
housing
property
values
taxes for
are
500.
reassessed.
Yeah,
So if my home value goes up, the mill that we passed at our most recent levy does not go up, isn't that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So it is not affected by the by the next evaluation.
Correct, absolutely.
Back to you, Dan.
Are you going to play, Dr.
No,
Dixon?
no,
No?
let it
All
go.
right.
Come on.
Mr. Hines?
Come on, you
you're in.
got a paddle, you got to play.
You have one of these.
We did
You're
give you a
forcing us
paddle.
to do
Yes.
it.
Okay. Let's see. 5-year forecast for 300.
All right. So these are purchase orders that are obligations to be paid at the end of a year. That's the term for purchase orders. So it's just, these are all things that you're going to see in the 5-year forecast, or you do see in the 5-year
Exact
forecast.
term on
Yeah,
that.
I'm trying to think of the exact term.
I know, I got to open the 5-year forecast.
Quick.
Yeah, stop looking at your
That's
5-year
cheating.
forecast. All right, I didn't count the timer, but I think we're good on that. Yes, so yes, Ms. Lewis, you do have it right.
That's
That is
because I keep
encumbrances.
forgetting the word and asking you every time, so now I know it. It only took me 3 goes.
So encumbrances, if we have purchase orders at the end of a fiscal year, we're still obligated to pay those potentially, so it's what we call encumbrances, and you see those as a separate line item in a 5-year forecast. Mr. Hines?
Well, we don't have anything in the 18-19 budget picked, so
That's because we're scared of it.
being a
Don't
firm
be
believer in bingo, I'm going to ask for 18-19 budget for 400.
All right. So this is the percentage of revenue in that budget to the district from property taxes. How much of our revenue for 18-19 comes from property taxes?
Oh, goodness.
Any guesses?
Really? Okay, I was high.
64%.
That was high, okay.
Yeah, 64%.
64, okay.
So, which is actually a significant amount when you look at districts, particularly, many of the rural districts, you're going to see much higher state share versus property tax share.
Right.
So 64% would be considered a high number. All right, are we on Miss Wright?
Miscellaneous school funding for 200.
All right.
Do they get harder as the dollar amount goes up?
They're supposed
theory.
to, but
Okay.
that's sometimes what I feel is and isn't is subjective. So I have to apologize. So the fund that we use for capital spending.
That's your timer?
That is.
It's a cute little
I
fluffy
didn't
noise.
make this
I
program.
thought it was you at first.
Yeah, I know.
I did too.
Right.
I was
This
in,
was the program provided to me. I
Yeah,
had
that's
no
good.
clue.
I was in
But
by
you're
the
correct.
budget.
That is the permanent improvement fund. So
This is
all
good.
right.
All right, school board members for 100, please.
So this school board member is a former football player. I won't use the timer since it makes a crazy noise. So we have Posh, Dan, and what does Jody say?
Who am I?
It's
Who am
Miss
I?
Serini.
You played football, good for you.
All right,
Excellent.
Jody.
Girls powder puff team, and I played on a co-ed team after school.
Neat.
After college.
That was a good piece of trivia.
That was a good one.
The girls powder puff was two-hand touch, and the other one was flag.
Well, and that's why I
Co-ed
put
team
the
was
football and the clock tower the first two, because I knew everyone would guess you for those.
I need to do something about my reputation.
Yes, you do.
Obviously you do. Poor Dan.
Wow. Miss Serini, you're up.
Let's go with miscellaneous school funding for 500.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, did you do the 100?
That's all right. I can go back to, go to 5.
We didn't have time to read it anyway.
Excuse me, so the amount the district saved in interest by refunding our bonds in December of
That was
2017.
Oh, God, what was it?
Oh.
So you'll recall that when we issued all these bonds for all this that we were talking about tonight, that we saved some amount of money when we did the refunding.
I think it.
We're all over the,
$5 million, Mr. Posh, you're right.
Nice.
Yes.
I knew there was a 5 in there. I thought it, boy.
Money man.
Okay, $5 million. That's huge.
Yeah.
It was a
We
big-
were very excited at the time.
Yeah.
Now I know, now I
Yes.
remember why.
I'm excited
Wanted to
again.
use that money.
Right, that's exactly right.
But also, not that you are not reaching for a pat on the back, but you deserve it, because that was entirely on Scott's own initiative.
Yep.
You went out, you were aware, you found that, you did that, you were, that, so,
Yes, it
Well,
just-
and we had to
Bravo
rush it and take
to
advantage
you, yes.
before the tax laws
Yeah.
changed
Yeah,
in
yeah.
December,
right.
so that
And
was,
so, again, bravo to you.
Yes.
thank you. Or anything we can do to save the taxpayers some money.
Yeah.
well, yeah, it's,
All right, Mr. Posh, you're up.
property taxes for 2.
All right. The Ohio law that prevents tax levies from growing with inflation. We've referenced it a couple of times tonight. Does anyone remember the name?
I don't know.
I remember
No,
when
I
he
made
was in
this up.
California. What's it, what number is it here?
9 something.
You're right, House Bill 920.
Okay.
So House Bill
Okay.
920, yes, so that's the law that
You know
prevents,
you're a nerd when.
that prevents
Proposition
property
13
taxes.
in
Right.
California,
Yeah, there
because
you
I
go.
lived there and that was all anybody talked about.
So when Dan was referencing the fact that,
House
you
Bill
know, when we
920,
pass a levy, that
920.
that levy can never bring us more money than what
Mm-hmm.
it does at the time that it's passed. Even as your home value increases, then the millage will decrease so that it's always
It's a
that same
fixed
amount of
dollar
money.
amount
Fixed dollar
regardless
amount.
of proportions. Yeah.
Correct, and that's due to House
But
Bill
it also
920.
doesn't go down.
That's true. So if property values decline, then you get the reverse effect.
There is the fluctuation, though, with receipts, because, you know, if you've got people who are late and
Exactly.
Well, we did for a good
And
while
we
there.
did have that, yes.
And now the percentage of
Mhm.
taxes collected has gone back to
Or when we have
a
them
more
early,
reasonable
little
level.
bump.
like this year, when we
Yes.
had them early.
Indeed. All right, who's up now? Oh, Dr. Dixon.
Okay, 5-year forecast, 500.
Ooh.
All right. So you'll remember, speaking of getting some of that property tax money early, the term for the increase in property taxes in 2018, followed by the decrease we're going to see in 19, and then a return to the normal level. There was a term for that, if you'll remember. And really, we bring this up just to remind everyone, and actually Shaker's the one who brought the term forward, to say that we got those increased property tax in 2018 because of the tax law change. In 19, we're going to see a corresponding decrease, and then in 20 and forward, the levels are going to come back to where they need to be and move forward. Anyone on that?
Oh, yeah.
Can't remember.
A pleasant surprise is accurate, but that was the accordion effect. so that's-
Accordion effect.
That's what I called it.
Okay.
But a pleasant
Right,
surprise,
okay,
we'll take that too.
Okay.
All
It's
right,
not often we get,
Mr. Hines.
let's do, school board members for 300.
So the school board member owned a video store. That's correct, that was Mr. Yes. See, it wasn't even a bad one.
You can come up with about yourself?
I chose a nice one. There were some options.
Checkered past. Hopefully a checkered future, too.
Absolutely. All right, who's up? Beverly?
Oh, I'm gonna say, 2018-19 budget for 100.
All right, so what is our fiscal year end date? And I bring this up because there was, I think that some people were not totally clear on it, so it is June 30th, correct? Very close. Everyone got it? Very close, very close. Yes, so our fiscal year end date is June 30. We do have some calendar year end types of things, but June 30th is fiscal year end for all schools. Molly is up next.
5-year forecast for 200, please.
All right, so the only fund that is included in the 5-year forecast. So you'll recall that we have many funds, grant funds, permanent improvement fund. There's only one fund that is included in the 5-year forecast. Else guessing? We have Dan and Jim.
I don't know what it's
Yeah,
called.
general fund.
Yeah,
General fund.
All right.
Correct. So when you see the 5-year forecast, when you see, and we'll talk just a little bit about appropriations tonight, you're passing permanent appropriations, but only the general fund, which is basically your operating fund, is the one that's in the 5-year forecast. We have the permanent improvement fund, we have grants, we have a self-insurance fund, there's a food service fund, so lots of other funds, but the only one that is really unrestricted and used for the 5-year forecast is.
The self-insurance fund is exclusively for healthcare related?
Correct.
Yes, okay.
And the appropriations annually put monies into those funds.
Yes, so oftentimes when you look at the total annual appropriation, you'll see a number for the general fund, which ties to the 5-year forecast, and you'll see that tonight. But then you see all these other funds, so someone will look at that and say, oh my gosh, your annual appropriation's $170 million. Well, no, it's the 110, that's the general fund, plus these other funds, which in some cases are purely accounting transactions. So, as Dan said, the self-insurance fund is really a fund where we charge ourselves healthcare in the general fund, then we receipt it into the self-insurance fund, then we pay the carrier out of the
Spend it
self-insurance
from
fund.
there,
So
right.
some of them are just used for accounting transactions, and then others are for grants, so they're completely outside.
Do we have a stopgap for that, or, yeah, is it 100,000, or what do we do for that?
It's a million.
It's $1 million.
Yeah, and we're talking about actually changing that number too, so, but that's, and at some point, if it's helpful, I think some board members have expressed some interest in getting a little bit into the healthcare, and so we will bring a presentation to you that kind of gives you some of the details about all of that. Who's up next, Jody?
Okay,
Think?
fiscal transparency for 100.
It's going to be an easy one, right? The frequency that Cleveland Heights University Heights Board approves the 5-year forecast.
Oh. Dan said 6 months. 2 times a year.
Well, is legally, or?
I
when
guess
we-
we'll accept two answers here, but what we're looking
Okay.
for is the frequency that this board,
Oh, we got a
Approves.
monthly update.
you do it monthly, correct?
Okay.
Yes, so that's monthly
Yes.
for us, legally required to be adopted twice a year. So anyone who had that semi-annual number was right for that. It was October and May, and now it was just legislatively changed to November and May, but that doesn't take effect until next year, so.
Why did they change it from October to November?
You know, I believe that, and Talisa may know a little better than I, but it seemed that there were a lot of districts fussing that October was too close because you're statutorily required to pass your permanent appropriations in October.
Right.
And then turn around and do the 5-year forecast simultaneously, so they wanted to try to space that out a little bit, I think, is the
I
reason.
wonder if it had anything to do with the fact that November's often open enrollment month?
That is absolutely possible. Raj?
Oh, property taxes for 300.
We're running out of numbers here. Okay, so the percentage of our property tax revenue that is residential. So you'll remember that or not, maybe not, but we've tried to at least put in some of the publications that, we have a significant amount of residential property tax. So does anyone have a guess on the percentage there?
I'm gonna guess. This is a complete guess.
83. So actually, Molly and Jody were right in between.
82, I was at 85.
So
right.
we are primarily residential. That's one of the points we always try to make during the levy campaigns. That we don't have a significant commercial or industrial tax base like Solon and Beechwood and all of these other
Yeah.
districts. That most of our money is coming from homeowners.
Is the rate the same on commercial industrial as it is residential property, or is it calculated differently?
It's taxed at the same rate, but the effective millage is different. So if you look at what, House Bill 920 affects those properties differently. So if you look at what's actually being paid on residential versus commercial and agricultural, it's at different rates, although the voted millage is the same number.
Got it.
But aren't there things like homestead exemption and stuff like that? So there's breaks that you see in the personal?
A little bit. They got rid of the rollback, so there's still homestead, but the rollback where the state used to give us 12.5% of the homeowner's property taxes, they did away with a few years ago, so.
That was one of K6's first.
Correct. So any new levies, that amount of money, there's no relief to homeowners for that.
Then there was the inventory, wasn't the business inventory thing that we lost as well.
Correct, the tangible personal
Tangible,
property tax.
yeah,
That was
TPP.
legit.
Yeah.
Big hit.
Dr.
Property
Dixon?
taxes, 500.
All right. The percentage of your home market value that you actually pay property taxes on. So there is a percentage of your, anyone else? Molly has it's 35%.
Okay, I
So-
had it
Sorry,
flipped.
I'm the landlord. I know this.
So if you have a $100,000 home, you're paying property taxes, whatever millage there is, on $35,000 worth of home.
So is it, okay, so the ballot language, though, doesn't specify that.
That's correct.
No, it doesn't.
Which is,
But when you get your tax bill from the county in the mail, from the treasurer's office or whatever it's called, it'll show you your assessed value and your taxable value, and that's 35% of the assessed value.
what's awkward, though, is when levy committees have been trying to pass levies, the ballot language is intentionally misleading because it makes it seem like the millage is based on the full appraised value. of the
Correct, because we
property
always
as
talk
opposed to
about
the
X number of dollars per $100,000 of value, but it's not. It's per 35% of $100,000.
Yeah, so we should
like,
just, we
yeah.
should be really clear in our,
And I want to say there was some proposed legislation to change because that's statutory, the ballot language is,
Right.
it must read a certain way. But I think I know that we've advocated for many years that change so that, we can do something about that because it is confusing to taxpayers. All right. Who's next? Mr. Hines?
Let's go 5-year forecast for 400.
So we have a reserve set aside in the current forecast for a property dispute regarding this medical facility.
Oh, yeah. That is, oh, crap. I used to go there for, went in and out.
Got to write.
I'll take either answer.
Yeah,
So
okay.
it's, so Kaiser, I was going for Kaiser as the name of the facility, but also two of you have the actual amount of money, which is $3 million. So that's perfect. So
Aren't we wrapping that up soon?
well, that was ruled, remember there were 6 years that were in question. We prevailed in 3, we lost in 3. So the $3 million is still sitting out in a 5-year forecast as a reserve. We're simply waiting for the county to actually take that deduction, so I'm
And
not
I
going to
think we have
prompt
to
them.
stress that because
but-
some people.
No, there's no need to remind
Yeah, I
them.
don't want to remind them, I don't want to take
Right,
it.
right, but some people, even the conversation I had recently, they thought that that was just money that we had. And it's like, no, it just.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Right.
Right.
So we had to explain that again, and matter of fact, I was in a meeting, I text Scott, I said, okay, this money is coming out, right? He said, yes, they just haven't taken it out yet,
Yes.
but.
But we're currently collecting interest on it, right?
Correct.
So we might as
long as
well
we
hold on to
to
it as.
So don't prepay that.
Right.
As I'm concerned right now, that's a don't ask, don't tell.
So there's no lawyer's fees or anything on their side that were, and is there any chance that they can try to claw that back?
No,
Right.
and not in terms of attorney or any kind of legal fees. So just the amount of property, I mean, they've had to pay any of their attorney's fees, and we've paid ours throughout the whole dispute. And so now at this point, it's simply a matter of the fact that the property was ruled non-taxable. So the money that they've already paid needs to be returned to them by the county. So we're just waiting for the county to do that, and
Well,
you
wait.
know,
Yeah.
in their
We can be very
bureaucracy, it
patient.
just hasn't happened yet. But that reserve is money that we will lose at some point.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and they told me it would be before the end of this calendar year, but I haven't seen any indication of that yet at all. Who's next, Miss Wright?
Let me do fiscal transparency for 200.
So here is the voluntary detailed annual report that we prepare.
Big one. Yes, is that what we call it?
Correct.
Yes.
That's the CAFR. So.
That's the CAFR.
Yeah, so this, again, these are available on the website, they're also available in print here, but this gets into everything you wanted to know and more about every fund we have and every, you know, there are a lot of statistical tables in here, some of the information is very interesting and useful, and so most people read the introductory section and the statistical section, and they leave the center out, but it is, and I know, Molly, at one point, you were telling me you were reading that, had it on your nightstand for a bit.
It was excellent bedtime reading.
Yes.
Next to the contracts, that,
Yes, right.
either on top or below that.
3 paragraphs later, I'm out.
All right, Molly.
Oh, let's do school board members for 500.
Bingo.
I can't remember the team.
Became a member of the Teamsters to use a backhoe in first job as a grave digger.
Wow.
Beverly? Is that a process of elimination?
Yeah, right, I think so.
So yes, that is Mr. Posh.
All right, one of my favorite
day of the year.
Dave Matthews songs.
How old were you? How long did you last? Not very long.
I started working construction.
Not everybody can say they were a grave digger.
Right, absolutely.
Or you're
I think we might have a new
The
nickname.
blue people.
All right, Jody.
Miscellaneous school funding for 300.
All right. So school funding in Ohio has been ruled unconstitutional multiple times by the Ohio Supreme Court based on an over-reliance on what? That is correct. That is property taxes. So you'll remember our own Jane Geneva, former Lay Finance Committee Chair, wrote a couple of briefs during all of those lawsuits that happened back in the day. And mind you, even though it has been ruled unconstitutional, I think it was 4 times
4
altogether.
times,
Yeah. that,
DeRolf.
There's still
DeWalt,
no.
that's, is it DeWalt?
DeRolf. Yeah, that still, that continues to be unconstitutional and nothing's changed, so.
Right.
Mr. Posh,
Property taxes for 400.
okay, closing that one out. So this is the name for voted mills after they are reduced over time by House Bill 920. So once a voted mill is reduced by rising property values, this is the term for those, for the mills. Anyone?
I'm gonna put it down.
Outside, no, it is, no. It is effective. So it's effective millage. So you have your voted millage and you have your effective millage.
Effective.
So actually,
Darn.
So what's the outside?
What's outside millage
Yeah,
then?
then what is that?
outside millage is anything that's.
It's another question
More
that we
or less,
haven't
yeah,
gotten to.
anything that's not inside is considered outside. So any voted millage is outside.
Yeah, right.
So our
Active
voted
is it?
millage, our voted mills, 156. Our effective mills, because of rising property values, 88 for residential.
Wow, that's a huge drop.
88 for residential and 107 for commercial, and that's where so that's the difference that you have there. So,
Okay.
that's. That, okay, we have just a few left. Who's next? Dr. Dixon? I'm sorry, Jim,
Oh, I'm
did you?
sorry.
No, I just,
Yeah.
did I just do one?
I think.
No,
Okay.
we just talked about you being a grave digger.
Okay, fiscal transparency, 500.
All right. So this is the name of the citizen group created in the early 80s to review district finances.
That's a good one.
Correct. So that is the Lay Finance Committee. Everyone got that one right? So we are in a process, as everyone knows, of final edits on the application for the reconstituted Lay Finance Committee. So I know I passed some edits on to Caroline, so I think we're just about
We
there
want to be
with
ready
what
to
that looks
post,
like, and
yeah, after this meeting.
we'll be able to post them soon. So we should be collecting, start collecting applications soon for the, but it's been around for a long time. And I know Jim
And
was
still
a member
needed.
for a period of time as well.
You know, we should, just to put it back on the radar, we do need members probably for the BAC
As well.
as well, because we've lost.
A few of
We'll see
those.
where we want to go after this is done.
Yeah, I mean, we're staffing 2 significant committees right now with advocacy and
And
lay
finance.
finance. I'd
Yeah.
like to really see how that plays out. And actually, there's some commonality, that's probably not a word, but, okay, so if there's some people that are applying for the lay finance, they may be suited for the bond accountability.
Got it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there could be some overlap
Yeah,
there.
there's a lot of overlapping, yeah.
All right, just 5 left. Dan?
Budget for 500.
So this is the amount, how about that, the one you checked? It's the amount of money budgeted for payment of voucher options
For this year?
for this year. So you may have to make a guess because it has changed slightly. But
So,
I remember
does this
the
include?
total.
this includes Peters, this
Yeah, this
is
is all-
Ed Choice.
Oh, all of it, okay.
Oh,
charter,
all of it?
All vouchers.
I think, I remember this being the total last time I looked at it.
All right, everyone's in the ballpark.
Yeah.
Well, now where did it go? 8.5.
8.5.
That's good. Close.
8.5 million out the door this year for vouchers.
Which is also
And this is something that we've
almost
been talking
equivalent
about a
to
lot.
the entire last levy.
Correct.
Right, it's
Much
more, because that was a
Because the last
6
levy was actually 5.5 mils.
Yeah.
So-
Which would have brought us less than $6 million.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, this is significantly more. That's right.
Let's see. 5-year forecast, 400.
How many years of actual history are in the 5-year forecast?
Are we allowed to cheat by looking at it
No.
in front of us?
You have a certain number of years of history, then you have,
I would say,
your budget, and then you're out
Is it-
4 years.
Okay.
It is 3.
All right.
It is 3. 3 years of history.
Oh, the history. I think, how many do we look at?
Well,
I guess I didn't read the question.
Yeah, well, that's how you got the
Teacher will
first
tell
one right,
you.
when you said summary.
All right.
All right, fiscal transparency, please.
So the frequency that the district is audited by the auditor of the state of Ohio. Annually, so every year. Yeah, every year.
So,
So
it doesn't have to be the auditor, does it?
it doesn't have to be auditor state, it could be a private auditor. And I think that we just wanted to kind of make sure that everyone understands, because I think that's a point that tends to get lost sometimes, is that we do have an independent, whether it be the auditor state or an outside auditor, audit the books. Their opinion letter is put into the CAFR. And so, we have clean audits every year, and actually, you'll remember the auditor state came and, were very complimentary last year in terms of
Yep.
So,
what was going on, so.
a decade or two ago, we had the state.
Mhm.
I think when Petro was one of the auditors. And then we went to, did we do Cohen and Company at the time?
We
How did
did,
that-
CHUH and Panicki was our auditors for a time. And then you are allowed to be away for, I might have to have my helper out here in the audience help me. Sandra, do you know how many years? I think it's 10 is the max. How many years we were with CHUH? Yeah, so you can go to an outside auditor for 10, and then you're forced to go back
Come back and
to
have
the
the
auditor
state in,
state
yeah.
for a certain period of time,
Wha-
so.
Why do you use an outside one?
Well, we used an outside one because the auditor of state is, at that time, I would say, and I think they've improved a little bit, but inefficient. So they would come here, and it would take them a good 6 months to do our audit.
At which time you can start next year's audit.
Which, yeah, exactly. It's like,
Right,
we block off the red conference room and they're there for 6 months, and that was no exaggeration. Where some of the private auditors were able to come in and they could do that audit in 2. So that was really the reason. There was and actually it wasn't much more expensive to have the private audit done, and it was just much easier. So,
So the state charges us
oh yeah,
to audit us.
correct.
For our use of taxpayer money, which is also paying them,
Nice, nice.
That's correct.
that we're then
All
paying
those
them
things.
too.
Yes.
Right.
So there you go. It's a
Yeah.
vicious cycle.
Ballpark, what do we pay them? Just ballpark.
I want to say 40,000. Sandra does the purchase order for that, so she would probably know. 40-ish?
40-ish.
Yeah. I would say somewhere, it varies depending on, for example, when they had to implement GASB, whichever the latest GASB was for pension liability. That caused them to do extra testing, and there was some more disclosures. So it can vary a few $1,000s either way, but in the $45,000 range annually, I would say, for the state auditor to do that audit. Who's left? Oh, Jody. Jody
Oh,
and
me?
Chandler. Yeah.
Budget for 300, let's go big.
All right. So what is the state share of the per pupil funding of $6,020? So you'll remember that we only get a percentage of the $6,000 per kid that the state gives us, and we get that based on the fact that we have high property wealth in the district. And we actually bill the state for the difference between what they give, what we should have gotten for $6,000 and what we actually got when that money went out the door. So anyone hazarding a guess? So 36% or 2,000.
Oh, my God, that's a lot less
2167.
than I thought, okay.
So when the state in their formula, they reduce the amount of that $6,000 per kid based on the amount of local property wealth and some other factors. But basically, that's the gist of it. And so we are
really
considered a
only
high,
get
dense
2,000 per
dense
kid.
property wealthy district. So we get $2,000 a kid.
We get $2,000 a kid.
They
and-
subtract out 6,000 for every,
For vouchers,
Yeah.
correct. So that
Okay,
was
just
what
saying.
we
Yeah, yeah,
billed the
that's
state.
good, that's good.
For the
We said,
difference.
you're only
Yeah.
giving us 2, but you're taking 6.
right,
Right.
So we're gonna bill you the difference.
for that
So
remaining.
people who say that this is trying to bring competition into the schools, it's not level competition. People who say that, I'm sending my kid, your district isn't losing anything because you're still getting my tax dollars, it's a false comparison.
Correct.
That they're taking their child's state money and 2 other children's state money with them.
So when you say you bill the state the difference, you bill the state the $4,000?
Correct.
Okay.
So, yeah.
We don't get it.
Yeah,
It's
but that was
ceremonial.
a ceremonial,
Right. Yeah, they didn't give it to us, and we're still waiting for that check.
Okay.
But we did.
But we're gonna continue sending bills.
And then remember the board, we did that resolution that the bill back, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was all behind,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
Some
that
of the
was
advocacy stuff that the board did, yeah.
multiple years.
Yeah.
All right. Last
Last one.
question.
Nice job.
I'll do budget.
Go daily double.
So there you go. Yeah, we did no audio daily doubles, although Mark asked if we were going to do that. So the percentage of the budget that is salaries and benefits. All right, so it is roughly 80. I went and said number that we generally use. In fact, I want to say it actually ended up being about 77. So Dan, you're the closest there. But typically, your budget is going to be 80% in a district. It will vary. In our case, it doesn't seem to be quite as much because a much bigger percentage of the budget is vouchers.
Yeah.
So that's kind of skewing that number a little bit, I think, but otherwise that would be.
And that's in keeping with any industry really that is service sort of,
People-centered, right. Yeah.
sort of industry
Yes,
Right.
80% is a standard.
is a standard. This is not just a public school issue. This is, if you're,
Nonprofit theaters run at 80%
Yeah.
salaries.
well, I think hospital systems run at
Yeah,
about the
it's
same as
right.
well.
Because it's all about people.
Yep.
It's about people serving kids
Yeah.
for us. So we have a final Jeopardy question.
Oh, my,
Uh-oh.
okay.
I put my thing away.
I know, quick.
So what is the year of the next operating levy?
Can we be sarcastic like Dan?
We are, yes. 2020 is the one that so technically it was 2019 was what the levy was calculated to be, but we've talked a little bit about that, and so that's going to kind of transition us into the 5-year forecast conversation.
Yes.
Because
So-
we've kind of indicated that 2020 is possible and doable, and I think we have a 5-year forecast we want to share with you tonight that have a few changes from the previous one that will kind of, so
So,
anything that
well,
we talked about tonight that we can.
Just, one sec, just as in the spirit of transparency, we have made no formal
Correct.
decision on when the next levy's gonna be.
Correct.
However, I think when you look at how the 5-year forecast has been trending, I mean, we're all smart people. We've got smart citizens. I mean, when you look at the data and you look at the numbers, it's just inevitable that it will be in 2020. I mean, nobody wants to have a levy on the ballot when we technically don't need it. And I think that is where we're at. And, our mantra, although we don't say it in each board meetings, we're really, really concerned about the amount of money that we spend. And when I say that, we don't want to spend any more than we absolutely have to.
Well, and it's also
Thank
worth pointing out that, while we did, because, look, things like, we mentioned earlier that Scott's refinancing the bond saved $5 million. That's not $5 million added to our operating expenses. That's
Correct.
$5 million that went off, that basically paid down the bond.
What they would be
the bond.
charged, correct, for interest.
So we've taken a 4-year, we're hoping to take a levy that was designed and promised to serve 4 years, 3 years.
Originally 3.
3 years, and we've stretched it, hopefully,
For the fourth.
to the 4th. So, amen to that.
Yes, so that's absolutely accurate. Sandra, if you could save me one of those, I gave them all to you, thank you. So everyone's correct. So there's nothing that's been done or formally said in terms of when the next levy will be, other than back in 2016, when we passed the last levy, 5.5 mils, it was calculated to, thank you so much. It was calculated to last 3 years. So the way that works with levies, you know that your costs are going to continue to climb, and whatever levy you pass is going to be flat. So you have to take a snapshot of a point in time, knowing that you're going to have this flat revenue, you're going to have these climbing costs. So you figure out how to step up your flat revenue. On the front end, you're going to have revenue over what you're spending. Then there comes that midpoint where you're spending what you're bringing in. Then you come to the end where you're deficit spending, where you're spending down your cash reserves. So it's just a matter of the levy calculation is saying, we want a levy to last this many years. This is what we see in terms of what we're bringing in and what we need to spend, and this is the millage that's necessary to cover that over that period of time.
Right.
So the levy was calculated to last for 3 years. We've talked about over the years some reductions that we've made, some pretty significant staffing reductions early on in the levy cycle. We've had some increased revenue in the property taxes. So that was kind of where we were in September to say, it looks like we have a positive cash balance. So I gave you a copy of the September forecast there, or Sandra did, thank you. So you see that
You mean the October?
well, we have September and October here. I wanted to give you, I'm sorry, did we not give September? What? Thank you. So you're going to have September just for comparison, because I want you to be able to see
What's
that.
changed?
So you have October, you have the October forecast, you also have the October assumptions that we're asking for your approval tonight. But back in September, we had a positive cash balance in 20. So all these things that we've done brought us positive in fiscal year 20. But then we started our deficit in fiscal 21. So, in theory, we could have said at that point in time, we kind of alluded to it, that we could push the levy off a year and not go until 2020, because we still have a positive cash balance in 2020. Problem is, then you're really dealing with those large deficits that start trending after that. Thank you. So
Those are big.
yeah, so we said that would be, I think I might have even mentioned that looked like a levy of about 13 plus mils at that time. And that was, obviously not something that would be palatable. So the superintendent and I had some conversation to say, okay, what would be a target savings number that we could build into the forecast that both allows for that 2020 levy extension for that to the fourth year, but also will bring the millage down to a number that isn't quite so scary. And so so you'll see at the bottom of the 5-year forecast, we've included a target savings line. And if we have $750,000 in fiscal year 20 that we're able to save, that goes out, and then an additional 750 in 21, 22, and 23, that gets the millage amount to something that's closer to, we would say a ballpark, if I ran a mill mod on this 5-year forecast, of 7. Again, is that what it would be? Not necessarily, because once we get to that point, obviously things will change, and these numbers will change, but we wanted to say, okay, what's a target that we can work with, that we can get to through either additional revenue that we might receive, through we're not spending some of the budget categories that we have. If we have staff attrition and we don't end up replacing any of those people, all those numbers would factor into that target savings number that we're trying to get. So that's why it's not embedded anywhere specifically. It's kind of out here hanging on its own, because it could be any or all of those things, or a combination of those things. So, but we felt like that was a reasonable.
Yeah, that was reasonable, and we talked with our cabinet staff too, and stated, what are some reductions that we can make even with our own budgets. For example, we noticed with our supplemental contracts that we had amounts that were targeted for our high school and our middle school, that they did not reach that maximum. So we just reduced it. And said, okay, but we knew we needed to increase some of the supplementals for our elementary schools because we were going to start our K clubs for Kiwanis. So we were able to say, so there was some significant
net
savings
savings,
there, yes, but they still running the clubs that they had before. In our high schools and our middle schools. So doing some of that, and again through attrition and just making some cost savings to get that. So we believe that 750,000 is a good targeted number that we can get to easily without changing our standard of education that we're providing for our students.
And it's not like you're trying to cut $750,000 tomorrow.
Correct.
This is, you've got time to phase it in and,
Right.
and figure it out.
Correct. And it doesn't all have to be, as Scott stated, all staff.
Mhm.
We just said, and it could be we get some additional revenue from somewhere, but we're just saying that we believe $750,000 would not change our instructional model for the district. And that's a good number.
And even as we talked about, the moving forward with the facilities plan, and if there is any savings that can be achieved through a phase two of facilities or not, we don't know, but that would be a number that's nowhere in this forecast, but that
Correct.
would impact that.
Well, and increased enrollment will bring more state funds.
Correct, that's true too.
At $2,000 a kid.
Yes.
Every $2,000.
Sorry, I'm being
matters.
cynical.
Well, this assumes the current funding model with the biennial, because it's a biennial budget. So it's a possibility
It could
that
change.
the
There could be
next
a miracle.
governor could come
Yep.
in and do something completely different with funding
Right.
for education, and that could affect that number as well.
Well, it is worth pointing out at times like now that this governor's administration has done nothing but cut funding to Ohio's public schools. And as a result, it is worth pointing out that the comparative ranking of Ohio's public school has gone down. That when this governor took office, Ohio's public schools were ranked 5th in the nation. And 8 years later, after 8 years of devastating budget cuts and attacks on public education from all sides that he controls, we're now down to being ranked number 23 in the nation. Those have taken place from budgetary issues, things that have been tucked into the state budget, which is not, you cannot go after the state budget items in terms of referendums. So that all of those items are completely outside of the democratic process. He has loaded the deck in the State Board of Education with people who support these ideas. So November 6th will be an opportunity for Ohioans to voice their beliefs on Ohio's public schools slipping from number 5 in the nation to number 23.
Agreed.
Back to our
Well-
discussion about potential cuts. Would this, I know you said it would not impact our educational model, but is it likely to impact our class sizes? Is there still a target we try to stick to, like I think it was around 24, we wanted to have 24 or less or something, or 22 or less kids?
Right. It could, because what we're finding is we're identifying more of our students who are considered special ed. So we know by law, we have to educate those students differently, and so those class sizes have to be smaller.
Okay,
So sometimes the trade-off is you increase some of your other classes, especially in high school and middle school, they have larger classes. So it may, however, we believe that as people retire through attrition, it would be our first target. Make sure we get there, and then our budgets. We believe that with our budgets, for example, we saw a recent savings. We got an unanticipated $30,000 for our safety grant. So we knew then, we don't have to spend $30,000 on something else that we had anticipated.
Right.
Because now we have
That
these
frees
grants.
up the-
That freezes
Right,
up.
enough
So
money, yeah.
we know being more intentional about that, and then really trying to spend our grant funds first, and getting our staff to really understand it's very important that you spend grant dollars first, because you may not see those again, and it relieves the general fund. So it's really changing the philosophies and making sure people understand that grant dollars must be spent first. And that's with our professional development dollars, our Title I dollars. So in changing the thinking of that, how they spend their dollars, those dollars first, it just relieve some of those general funds, because you are being very intentional how you spent those dollars.
What is our target for class sizes? I know we had a number that we were trying to stay around. I know sometimes it would go up a little bit or down a little
Yeah.
bit, but wasn't it 24?
24 to 25, so
Okay.
we have some that are at 25, some at 26. But you can have up to 32, 30, 32. We try not to have that,
I would
especially
say
in
that's
elementary.
not our goal.
It's not our
Our
goal.
goal is
You know,
to stay
and-
around
Right, in our
25.
high school, yes, we may have some, in our elementary classrooms, we really want those if all possible, to stay smaller.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're not making that trade-off, that we would say, oh, our goal is now to be much higher
Right.
students per class.
It's not our goal. We know we are challenged with that sometimes, because it's the trade-off. You have two classes of 26, one 25, one 28, do you balance, or do you bring a new teacher? So it's that trade-off, so that we really try to be intentional about. But looking at the numbers early and staffing early, it really helps us with that. And even our budget, that's why we stated we want to come in the spring, in March and April, we're saying, you know what, here's the budget. And you will see the savings and the cuts that we've made in the spring as we get prepared for the next year.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there are some classes at the high school right now that are quite large, and it's
Right, yeah.
a little cumbersome.
Right, and that trade-off too is as we invest in AP courses, so it's a trade-off. So you may have that AP course with 15 students, and then another classroom with 30 students. So and then you go back and say, okay, is this an AP course that we offer every other year? Or, so all of it is so strategic, it's amazing, so you have to make sure that those courses are in sequence. And then we have students that are doing other events, so you have students that are going to John Carroll, or they're going to CTE, so it really causes a challenge when you're trying to figure out, are you going to have more kids taking English in the morning or the afternoon? So it's really like putting a puzzle together to really balance it out, especially at the high school, more so than at the elementary and in the middle schools.
This brings up a couple of
Good question, though.
thoughts. So, first of all, when it comes to special ed, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that statewide, about 13% of the overall student population statewide is identified as special ed in some way, shape, or form. Our numbers are higher than that. I want to say around 17
About 18.
to 18%. And so it's important, I think, for us to just sort of talk about how, that it's not that we have any more students in our district probably that are needing special ed services. It's just that our district does not represent our school, our city communities, and that many of the students who are not using our schools are attending private schools that some of whom don't serve the special ed population as well as we do. So while some students choose to go elsewhere, many of the families with students with special education needs choose to stay in our district, which is great. We're thrilled to have them. We're thrilled to serve them. I had a thought about a couple of things just sort of occurred to me. We this year launched an alternative middle school platform that I think it would be interesting to get an update on how that's going at some point.
Okay.
And then also you talked about scheduling. And, one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that while we are opening up these amazing new middle schools, so that sort of the bricks and mortar stuff is coming together so beautifully. It's more than just bricks and mortar that is changing at the middle schools, that we are, we're opening up 2 new science classrooms at Monticello. So we are improving the education opportunities as well. It's not just about the shiny stuff. It's about the education that's being delivered there. And we have talked about, hoping to get some tiered courses back in science and social studies as well. So as you're talking about sort of planning those schedules and those course offerings, sort of the reverse engineering of those, when do those decisions start to get made and the schedules, the courses begin to get plotted and planned out?
It's a good question. So we're doing that now. So in our summit discussions, that's what we're talking about. Let's get ahead of it so we know. So since we're now intentionally putting ourselves on the budget cycle, we know when we come in the spring to approve the budget, all of those considerations would have been made. So what course offerings, we know we're bringing computer science next year. Okay, what does that mean for our master schedule?
To the high school, to the middle schools?
To the high school.
Okay.
Right, and we're talking about some other STEM-like or coding-like classes for the middle school. What does that look like? Some honor courses for the middle school. Again, being intentional, what are those courses? When are we going to give those course offering sheets? All of that must happen earlier now in order for us to meet the timeline that we set for ourselves to bring it back to you. So we come to you guys and say, here's how much money we're spending, and this is what we're spending it on, and the offerings that we have. So it's going to be more work on the staff, and they recognize it. But this is how, you plan for the next year early while you're in the current year. And we've been more intentional about it this year, primarily, but we want the parents to know, especially for the middle schools, we don't want to wait, because in the summer, they're going to be moving to their new buildings. Parents should know in early spring what buildings, what courses, their schedules, all of that should be done. Because it's not going to have that time, not sure what that time is going to look like for going and doing a tour in the summer, because it's going to be such a big move that we want to make sure that that's done.
We usually, where I work, we usually do middle school scheduling in January, February.
Yeah.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Yes.
Different question. You mentioned staff attrition. We've got whatever it is, 930, 950 employees, something on that order. Do you have any sense of how many you expect to retire any given year? Is there some model you can use?
Do you know?
I'd have to get that
Yeah.
information.
I mean, the
They usually
teachers,
let us know in what, February? Well,
Yeah, there are
teachers are vested after 30, is that right?
Now teachers stay to 35.
35
Yeah,
years.
STRS recently changed that.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
but the other thing that's a little tricky with that is that we may know how many years that person has been in with us, but we
not
wouldn't know their
prior
other years of
districts.
service.
Right.
So, and they're not obligated to share that with us, nor would we have any way to know it. So
Yeah.
so a lot of times we'll have employees who will want to retire, and we wouldn't necessarily have known that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so we know we might have a senior leaning staff in terms of years of service, but not necessarily when they're going to go out.
There are some benefits as far as OTES goes to notifying the district early. You can avoid going through the joys of the Ohio Teachers Evaluation System if you notify the district early, although that may also, parts of that may be contractual.
And we have some incentives built into the contract as well for employees to let us know as early as possible in the process.
Right, yeah, because we usually find that out sometime in the spring, March.
Yeah,
Right,
February, March.
right. They kind of let us know, yeah. Because some areas, we kind of push, and Ari works well with us with that, so we know if there's some specialty areas that we need to recruit and get teachers, because we may not
Right,
have
because-
someone.
Right. You
Well,
can't
you
always
look at how
fill the
long did it
slot
take us
easily.
to find somebody to do American Sign Language?
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
that took forever because there are just not many people out there. It's another thing worth, since we're talking about it, the whole notion of keeping teachers 35 years now instead of 30 is a really significant kicking the can down the road in terms of the salary burden that this administration has inflicted on public schools. So what they've done by keeping people 35 years is they've by design said that, of course, once they're all out of office, Ohio's public schools will be full of people at the highest end of their
Right,
salary
the peak
scale.
of their earning power,
And
right.
getting older and health not being what it was when they were younger. So all of the associated costs with that. And it's just really kicking the can down the road, out of sight, out of mind, until somebody else is sitting in the governor's mansion.
Well, I mean, I think what I want to hear you say is it's fiscally, from a fiscal perspective, it's devastating
Absolutely.
to a school district like ours. I mean, it's great that our kids can benefit from experienced teachers.
Amen.
But when we negotiated our teacher contracts way back, it was based on this current model, and it shifted, and there's no way negotiating our way out of that now.
Correct.
So now we've got the step system, and we always knew, 30 years, you get your gold Rolex. Well, the problem here is we're paying for that gold Rolex now
For an extra 5 years.
for an extra 5 years at their top. I mean, so,
Right.
I mean, if you just do the math, how sustainable is that?
It's not, and it's nobody's fault. It's not the school district's fault for being put in this position.
It's not the teacher's
believe me,
fault.
there's not
Yeah,
a teacher who's going to want to, be a 75-year-old person, trying to navigate those hallways in between classes with their walker, And I'm going to be one of those people. So, in the end, it's just going to have to change. There will have to be a change, but in the meantime, we have to strategize, expecting this to be, hoping for it to change, but not being able to count on it.
So, on fiscal year 20, with the anticipated cuts of about 750,000, we have to let staff know if their contracts aren't going to be renewed, in the March timeframe? So that's generally if there's going to be layoffs. We usually find that out. So if we can't get the attrition number as high as we need, that, I'm going to, maybe looking at a worst-case scenario here, I mean, that means some percentage of our staff is going to have to get laid off. I mean, if you just do the math, I mean, maybe, you're looking for a total of 10 bodies, assuming that you can't find any other
If there was
savings.
If there were no other savings
Right,
elsewhere.
so I'm just
That
looking
would
at
be
this
10
from a
teachers. Yeah.
worst-case scenario here,
Right.
okay? Not saying we're laying off 10 people. And I know if you just look at the retirements, I mean, there's generally 10 plus on that list, so
There are a few.
we're probably safe. But just from a timing on when we have to approve this and when we be calculating, I mean, we have by code and by contract, we have to notify people in March. Will this be presented to us, you say in the spring, would it be before that date or after that date?
I think we would have the staffing complete,
Yeah.
by the time we would present, how we're going to reach that target
I'm-
at that time.
Yeah, I think we need to know before we're asked to approve it and before we're faced with community members fearing higher class sizes, fearing that their favorite teacher is going to be laid off. I mean, we need to do what's right fiscally and what's right for our students when it comes to academic achievement. I don't want to, and I got to think we should be able to find these kinds of savings.
Yes.
Especially if it's going to yield us the ability to delay the levy. And also, I look at the numbers, this gives you the opportunity to certify a contract too. I mean, because we have to go through, we have a negotiation
negotiations.
that's going to go
That's true.
through. You can't certify a contract unless we have literally cash in hand, or we know that we're going to have cash on hand.
There has to be a positive cash balance at the end of that fiscal year. So based on September's forecast, I could only certify a one-year contract. In this scenario, I can certify two.
A 2-year contract.
So-
Yeah.
And with, the assumption is what pay increase? Is there, do you
There's a
factor in a percent?
There's a 2% increase in salary, all salary lines, but that also includes any steps. So that's steps in cost of living.
I see, okay.
So, we would have to, in any given year, see what the actual cost of the steps would be, who's moving, and then whatever, up to a 2% would be. Or, again, if we, were to achieve some savings, even fiscal 19, which isn't in this scenario, if we end this year with some level of unspent budget or some additional revenue, that's going to impact all those numbers, and that actually impacts the ability to, for example, if we were to, roll the existing contract or something like that, what's in there is no change in benefits and 1.5% increase for salary, and then there's assumed 0.5-0.75% of steps. So that would be able to be covered in this scenario with a little bit of savings from
Right.
even the current fiscal year.
And with the new biennial budget that will be due this July 1st?
Correct.
If
We will know that as well, and that can be dropped in.
And with an administration that was much different than the current one, heaven only knows, it will be a new governor writing that new budget regardless. But that could be very promising
Could be. yes.
as well if there's significant change.
And that's the thing to always remember with the forecast, it's a planning tool, it's high level, so, a lot of things can change and will change with it, but
Right.
it's just to kind of give us a feel and a roadmap, I guess, to work with.
But I think to Scott's credit too, we have a much earlier start than we've
yeah.
had. We're really thinking about it being intentional to make sure. So, for example, remember when the technology team presented and said, we can cut our budget, Scott already cut it. So we're.
Don't have to ask me.
We have to try, so we already cut it.
Done.
So we have that there. So we're making sure that we're managing our resources more effectively. And again, as I stated, making sure we're using grant funds first. We want the class, we want to touch the classroom last.
And George is doing great work with life cycle planning in
Yeah.
terms of facilities. There's great responsible planning
Yes.
being done.
Yes.
But we're not out of the woods, for example, with the new middle schools. We can sort
no.
of see the end in sight already, which is helpful.
Yeah.
But we also have issues relating to facilities phase 2 that we thought we were able to address. Now, the laundry list of things that we've decided that we want to have included in that list, some of those things are costly, some of those things can yield savings. So we're going to have to be
It's going to be
very
a
careful.
long juggle and balance to figure it out.
Yeah, and we need to act quickly on this. So, Dan, you were very, you're dead on when you said in our conversations that are we moving too fast? I think the issue here is we almost have to move this fast. It may be difficult for us to move that fast. We may find we're not able to move that fast.
It's a good point, but also we're not moving in isolation of the other people in the organization. So we are keeping our unions informed and having conversations about different scenarios and some
Yeah.
possibilities and trying to make sure we're being very creative. And so I think that's something we've been intentional about to do earlier. So that's good, so we've had these conversations, what about this, what about that, what are some other things that we could potentially do, and what would be the impact of those decisions? So again, being very intentional and informing you earlier than we have in the past, and really having these conversations, been very intentional. Again, I think as long as we're very intentional, we having the conversations early, it's October. We're already talking about it. We know that some decisions will be made in the spring, but it's early enough that you can say, stop the brakes. We don't want that. We want to go in a different direction, and we've not made any permanent decisions. So I think that's a good
Well, I
move.
think it'd be helpful to see everything from a holistic perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of times where we've made, you're right, an isolated, either it's been isolated from, the people that are somewhat impacted by the decisions. But it's also been isolated from looking at how all the gears fit together. So for example, one of the things, I know Beverly, you're interested in, how we're dealing with preschool and those important things. One of the things we're looking at is this preschool, do we centralize or continue our decentralized approach?
Right.
What's the impact of that? Molly, you know the numbers, it's expensive to putting small toilets in rooms. I mean, because it's not just small toilets.
It's everything else.
There's everything else.
Yeah,
So, how do you, okay, but how does that impact
Right.
crazy things like the bus depot, which was, where's it supposed to be now? That we don't know what's going to go on with
Right.
our building next door, which is the other piece. So, I think it's important for us to have all this information and get some of this data pretty quick so we can figure it out.
Very true.
Agreed.
So Scott, where are we
So
with
we have
this?
two actual action items. It's approval of this 5-year forecast for October and also the permanent appropriation fiscal 19. There was a change in that to make it match the fiscal 19 budget of $116,006,000. So
Do they need to be done in a given order?
they are listed 5-year forecast first and then permanent appropriations. They need to be done separately, though.
So I motion that we accept the 5-year forecast.
Second.
Do we need any other discussion regarding this? And, okay, well,
And we will continue to, on a monthly basis, bring it back and make changes and continue to modify it as we go, so.
yeah, I think this is sort of a good path to hit on. I want to see really how we implement these savings. So if we can, since we are looking at this on a monthly basis, I don't have any trouble voting yes on this, as long as we're just continually monthly keeping an eye on it. I think this is a good plan. You guys think you could do it. I think it's great for the community. Let's see what it does and how all the student achievement things fall into place as you guys do all your planning. Call the roll.
Okay.
Call the vote.
Yeah, Ms. Wright,
Yes.
Mr. Posh,
Yes.
Mr. Hines,
Yes.
Ms. Serini,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis.
Yes.
Okay, so in the interest of time,
Oh, and then
We have one more.
Wait, we
I'd
have
like
to-
to motion that we accept
Oh,
the
the-
permanent appropriations.
I second.
call the vote.
Sorry, we got just there. Mr. Hines,
Yes.
Ms. Serini,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis.
Yes.
Ms. Wright, Mr. Posh.
Yes.
Okay.
Now we can move on to the policy, the third reading of the Citizens Task Force, as well as the Citizens Ongoing Committees. Do I have an objection if we combine these into one?
They say reading, it shouldn't have been,
They're
Yeah.
listed as.
it should be listed as
discussion
review and
only.
discussion. Because remember, I put on the email, there was some concerns about Lindsay's recommendation. So I asked that we utilize this meeting to review any of the final edits that she have. And then we would bring it back for the next meeting for approval.
For the last reading.
Right. And the reason we do that, another question, we've always utilized an attorney to vet even when we do any new policy or changes. What I try, that we do, we kind of make sure we're all on board with the language. So we make sure, I know that last meeting, it was suggested that Molly look at it again to make sure it says what we want it to say, and then we send it to Lindsay to look at it again. So she raised a couple questions. And if we're good on all of the edits and suggestions that she made, then I think we should move forward with approval. But we all have to make sure that we're okay with the language that, and an interpretation of what she thought was some concerns.
So I had no objections to her edits. I did want to talk a little bit about what she said in the email about wiggle room and stuff, because I don't know what she means and what we need to think about, if there's something specific.
All right. Hello?
You're on.
Any particular part that you're talking about with each policy?
Not the policy attachments themselves. The texts were fine, but in her email, Lindsay wrote, "Overall, my comments concern is that this is so specific, you may not have any wiggle room to allow for administration to take on parts of the process where that makes sense for everyone.
Right.
And also to make sure you have wiggle room when committee issues need to be kept more private."
Right.
So my reaction to that was, there is no requirement that we create a committee or a task force for something which we don't want to have discussed in public. What we're saying is we want the ability to create these objects precisely for public conversation, for gathering information and opinions from the wider population. But if there's something like student safety, which she mentioned, there's no reason that we would ever create a task force to discuss things that shouldn't be discussed in public.
You
Does
don't
that make
think
sense?
you would.
Yeah.
Right.
But you don't, the five of you don't think you
I
would.
actually. have
But
an
so
example.
if someone else comes behind you, you just want to make sure policies give you enough room to have some autonomy and not so tight that you're so regimented. So I think that's her warning to us, that we know we want to create something, but let's not create something that is not going to allow even us as administration not to have any wiggle room to make some different decisions.
So, for example, sometimes you have students whose special needs make them really sort of uniquely identifiable, even when you're not coming close to using a name.
Right, but everybody knows who you're talking about.
Everybody knows exactly who you're talking about. And so that's a circumstance where a subcommittee might be used to consider something, or the board might need to just sort of step in and say, so we need to do this. And out of respect for privacy, we're just going to do it. And we're not going to leave that, we're not going to include that perhaps in an overall task force's domain. So I think that when I read that, that's what I was sort of thinking of, that in order to just be a little bit more discreet sometimes and private, that's what came to my mind at least.
So does this text prevent us from doing that, or a future board from doing that? See, that's my question. I didn't see
I think if
this
she
language
believes it's
as-
too tight, it doesn't give the administration any wiggle room to do, it's too, there's a balance with board policies and giving administration flexibility to implement those policies. Because board approves, superintendent implements. So you don't want to be so, it can't be I'm saying, what the word I'm using,
So rigid.
Flexible or?
can't be so directive or restrictive that you don't allow your staff
Sure.
to have some flexibility. So, for example, we have task force that there are no restrictions on the task force. We compile a group of people, we're making some decisions, we're bringing those recommendations to the board. The board can choose to yay or nay based on Now, if there's a good recommendation or not. Now, I wouldn't bring any recommendations to the board that wouldn't be approved. That somebody else may, or put
yeah.
themselves in a situation where now the board is faced with a decision after a task force has worked on something for 9 months. And now you bring this to the board and the board says absolutely not. So just take our communities and schools, for example. We worked 6 months on that.
Yeah.
But with the hopes that the board gives you the blessing, okay? But you have to make sure that you're giving the board information and updating them, et cetera. So I think we just want to make sure that that the administration have enough flexibility, that it's not so restrictive that we bring something and the board says, no, we're not approving that. And then
So
you've
the
had-
Citizens Task Force, as we have written right now, including Lindsay's edits, basically give all of the decision-making for how the task force is, what its job is, who's on it, and how it functions, is all determined by the superintendent, which seems fine to me. The only place where the superintendent's slightly constrained is that, yeah, you gotta come back and tell the board what you've found. And that seems appropriate to me.
The superintendent can also dissolve the committee.
Right. Right, the superintendent arranges meetings, has the sole power to dissolve a task force, reserves the right to exercise his time whenever. So you can choose people, replace people, create the timeline and the goal list and all that. So I don't see that this language constrains the superintendent other than, come back to the board and let us know what you learned. Which is the point, right?
Right, this is how we operate now.
Okay, but it needs to be said that the existing policy 9140 is so vague that one could argue that we're not, because of these task forces that we've created and because we've had lay finance committees in the past, there's a lot of gray area in how you would apply current policy to how we're conducting business. And maybe I use the lay finance committee as an example of who sits in the lay finance committee, who's on the lay finance. You could even use the bond accountability commission. I mean, what happens? I mean, who appoints the members? I mean, we just don't have good policy. We don't use existing policy right now to handle how we currently conduct business. And I think that is the problem that we're trying to solve. And the whole reason we have that I've presented two different policies is, one, you absolutely do not want staff to be shackled by the board if you need to solve a problem and you need community feedback.
Right.
If you don't have a board that's not going to unanimously agree with you. This isn't you.
Right, I know.
But yeah, I mean, you're moving on, but the issue is, so are we, and so are you over time. I mean, but then again, the board, whoever's the current board can change the policy. So, I mean, the whole purpose of the task force
Slightly
is
more constraints on the standing committees than
Correct.
there are on
So I used the task force as
than
this
the task force,
example.
'cause the
but
task force is
the
really
task force
open.
is open.
Yeah.
It's the standard committees and I think the bottom line is we want to be able to give ourselves enough room so for example, we worked, when we had the lay, what was the other, the FAC. So we had the FAC, that was the board's committee, and it was in the superintendent's committee, and we ran into some concerns. So we decided that the BAC we would use the language of the policy to create the BAC so that the superintendent and staff were involved to kind of give it I don't know if more control, but just kind of say that this is a committee that that the superintendent has put together that's going to have board members and they're going to be reporting out, right? So there was some flexibility on that, how we're going to choose our people. Like now we're stating that we want more people to be on the BAC. So we got to figure out, okay, what does that mean? Who dissolves? We knew that, so all of that timeline and all that stuff was explained as people join the BAC. So if we move in a different direction, I mean, I think it's good that we're cleaning up the language of the committee. So it's a good thing. I just want to make sure there's some flexibility if something happens. Who's going to make the decisions about if something happens? Is it a board decision? Is it a superintendent's decision? So that I want us to be very careful, because it could be something where the board is saying, I don't want Joe Blow on this committee. Well, who's going to remove Joe Blow from the committee? Is it going to be the board that's going to decide that Joe is not on the committee? Or is it the superintendent? And it's very different, because I don't want the board to be in a position where they have to say to Joe, the community member, the five of us don't believe that you're on the committee. But the superintendent could say, you know what, we don't believe that your service is a need and we're going in a different direction. And that's a very different message than the board saying that. So that's what I mean by the flexibility.
So Lindsay's edits are basically add and/or superintendent to the language in the standing committees.
Correct.
Jim, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm not I just want to make sure that there is someone there that can remove a member. That's the big deal. There's no reference. And I think the standing committee is really structurally, by way of the mission of the committee, very different than what you would have as the task force.
Agree.
Okay.
Agreed. Totally different. Agreed.
I mean, the task force is really helping the superintendent and helping staff.
To make a decision, right.
Make a decision,
Yeah.
but also build support
Right.
for something in particular.
Correct.
For example, I know one of the things that's on your list that's been shared in some emails with us, but I mean, I don't think any formal decision's been made about when it comes to the facilities, phase 2 of the facilities, we as a board have asked Dr. Dixon to look at our preschools. And what are we doing with preschools?
Right.
And one of your proposed solutions
Right.
is, let's put together a task force and
Correct.
figure that out. Because it's not necessarily building support among staff, because part of this is not only decision-making, but it's also building support, so whatever gets decided, there's enough will of those members to proceed with executing that happily. Part of this is also just not staff, but it's our customers, our kids and our parents.
Yeah.
So you get them involved, and you get their feedback.
Yeah, you're getting the
So-
experts to investigate what it is you're trying to make a decision on. That's how I see task force. Get a group of people who are expert in that field to give you a recommendation about the feasibility of an idea. The committees are people who are experts there, who are there to give you professional expertise and feedback about something ongoing, like your lay finance. You would hope that you have a lot of people who love, with that background, who were committee members or community members who's going to, on an ongoing basis, give you feedback on the finances of the district. Now, when you get to a point and you say, well, I don't want Joe on the lay finance committee again, because she or he is disruptive, they never come, then how are we going to get rid of that member? Is it going to be the superintendent? Or is it going to be the board? And if you're okay with it being the board to say, Joe doesn't come to any of these meetings, let's remove Joe. We as a board believe that Joe, you don't come to you're off the committee. Then that's okay. But I think you want to be very just careful when you talk about committees and dissolving people from committees, because these are people of our residents who are volunteering their time to serve in this capacity, and then who is the person that's going to ask that person to be removed. In my estimation, it's easier for you to say to the superintendent, you know, we believe the committee should go from 6 to 5 people. You let us know how we get down to 5 people.
Well, we've had,
And however
we've
that
had
happens.
some stellar people help us,
Yeah.
absolutely stellar. And we've had some that it's been a little bit difficult. I mean, difficult in a way that, and I think probably it was in how the expectations were set. Because when you look at, I mean, one of the big expectations for what I would think the FAC should have been, that was never really conveyed to them, was the fact that you need to be coming to board meetings and presenting to the board and giving us your findings. Okay, we need to understand what you're learning about. And so what was happening is, and it was all good intended, but nobody at the FAC really thought it was their job to do that. They thought that, board members should be on that committee and they should be reporting up. The FAC thought the otherwise. And it was a little, and I think they would actually say, I think they used the word dysfunctional in a report. There was some dysfunction there. And when we retooled the Bond Accountability Commission, one of the most important things is reporting. Get your reports back out to us. And we intentionally made sure that some of the expertise that we had in that committee maintained, because we just didn't want to just throw it out the window and start new, because there was a huge amount of value that literally every member of that committee, its leader, it's the people that, broke out into these subgroups, were providing, value, but it wasn't, I think, the value that the board thought it was going to get.
Right. And I think the small thing, I think, the board, good intentions, I think the misstep that perhaps was made with that was it wasn't a superintendent's committee. Because I never attended a FAC meeting, because it was a board, the FAC was a board committee. So I think I think this solves that, though. I think
Does
this,
solve it,
right,
yeah.
this solves that, and this says
There's one
that.
sentence that
Yeah.
needs some tweaking, I think,
Okay.
in order to accommodate what you're saying, and that's the very last sentence.
Okay.
Where it says, upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the board may also choose to add, replace, or remove citizen standing committee members at any time.
Okay.
And perhaps that
Perhaps that.
sentence needs to be switched, so that it's upon the recommendation of the board, the superintendent may ditch people. Or we have the parallel structure that we have higher up, where we just say either the board or the superintendent may. And that's a slightly different structure, so it's a question of what we prefer. But I think certainly the before last paragraph, right now, with Lindsay's edits, is very strong about making clear that we need reports, they have to be regular.
Right.
You report up to the board, because otherwise you're working in a vacuum somewhere. And that's important.
It is
Yeah,
important.
those are the key
Right.
things.
My only question, though, is final reports. If it's a standing committee, why would it produce a final report?
So, for example, I think lay finance committee. In the past, they have presented a recommendation to the board that the board then uses to make a decision about
The specific millage or something?
exactly,
Yeah.
right? So
That's
there-
not a
so-
final report, that's a
well, but
report.
there is a report. but-
Because in 3 years, they're going to have another one, or 4 years, or
right,
5 years, right?
But there is so in my mind, the lay finance, there's like a cycle that ends, okay? You have work to do, then once you give your report to the board, then I'm not sure what they do the next
Then they
6
can
months,
relax
right?
for a little while.
So, but the advocacy committee, we're gonna be bringing recommendations to the board ongoing, saying, you know what? We think this is important that we may need to write a resolution on. So this is what we're working on, we're gonna do. So I see that differently. So I just think we just need to, every committee is gonna be different. And they just kind of establish what that reporting is, even the BAC. So we've had them come to speak. So is there at the end of it, and if so, we need to start getting that word. We want a report to BAC. Because remember with the FAC, we had that grading, and they would graded us, they used the red light, green light,
Yes.
yellow light. And that wasn't comfortable for the board. The board really did not like that type of reporting. But again, it was the board's committee, and so I think that I like this because we can kind of set some parameters of, okay, if you're going to do a final report, this is what we recommend the final report has. We want A, B, C, D. We outline what that looks like. We want the committee to report out 3 times a year. I like that timeline. And we state, okay, so when you're meeting, you'd say, what happens. One of the things, the reason we created the policy committee, it was because I said to Paul, it was so frustrating that we had board members approving policies, but we didn't have any subcommittee who was doing the vetting. So we would just give the board members a stack of policies and say, hey, go read. We're going to approve them on Tuesday night, right?
And some of them are pretty long.
Right. So
Right,
I
yes.
asked Paul, I
Yeah.
said, we have to figure out a way. So we established a policy committee with a group or smaller group of people who are using that time to vet those policies before they come to us. So the purpose of that. So maybe, is there a reported? It's something that we may need to add to that, to your point. But yeah, but now we have not talked about if we want to get rid of some people on that team, but it may be. But I just think that so we're real close to just making sure that the flexibility is there, and I think you may not see it now, but I think the main thing is protecting board members from making some decisions about citizens that may be uncomfortable, and I don't think it puts you in a good position to make those decisions. I think it's the board saying to the superintendent to make that
yeah.
decision, that flip.
I think that
would
flip
be-
accomplishes that.
Yeah.
It protects the board in that sense and puts the onus on the superintendent to be the bad guy.
Who you hire to be the bad guy.
Right.
And
that's
I mean,
okay.
and
I mean,
I
it
think-
is in the job
and
description.
I think that's
Yeah.
okay. I feel that it's okay for the board. But I don't know. That's just,
Well, I mean, I think if it's and/or, that's good, because if it was me, and if I was on a committee as a board member, and someone wasn't behaving properly on that board, or accomplishing what we needed to do in the mission, I mean, we have seen, I recall a situation in the Lay Finance Committee where, this goes back probably 10 years, where a prior member was comparing us to, he was doing like an apples and orange comparison about how we were wrong. And it was like, well, we can't pick our students. You're assuming that we can pick our students.
You didn't
What
kick
are
'em
you,
off the
what do you, I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
We're a public school
So,
district.
Yeah, we're a
By
public school
definition,
district.
we
So, I mean,
welcome
if we
everyone.
could,
Yeah.
yeah, we would get A's, but we don't.
Yeah.
I mean, this was not like in relation to,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it was a little unrealistic. And person dug in. So it's like, you're not helping us achieve the mission
yeah,
that we're
that's a good
trying
point.
to
Right,
achieve.
right.
And as a board leader, I would have no problem mentioning that, and I think we did at the time.
That's good.
So,
Okay.
I mean, I think, part of this is to help us be incredibly transparent and get more people in the decision, get more people, intentionally help people become more aware of like the numbers. I absolutely didn't like sort of the culture of the Lay Finance Committee, which was sort of, you do a lot of good work coming up with a mill model, and then sort of the joke around the table, and these were public meetings, okay? So I'm not like letting it out. It's like, well, when you vote on the millage, know that the board is going to want to knock it down. The elected board is going to knock it down to make themselves look good. I'm not sure that was really ever the case, but the fact is, you need a certain amount of money. You need a certain amount of money, and that's it. There's no games to play. Everybody needs to be a part of it. And I think one citizen that continually files requests for, always wanted to know the inner workings of the committee. And it's like, well, you can come to the meetings, and there are the minutes. And we don't meet otherwise. This is it.
Right.
I think it needs to be. I don't want there to be any perception of games that get played.
Right. Right, agreed.
And I would almost think that, in the past, everybody thought the role of the Lay Finance Committee was to set the millage amount that then the elected board would vote on. I don't look at that as a function of the Lay Finance Committee. I think they should look at the mill mods and come up with some ranges, and then give them to us, who are gonna have to decide what we think is gonna be best. They may choose a recommendation. I mean, I'm not gonna tell the committee what to do, but I don't want the committee to think that is their purpose. I want this committee to really understand the numbers, understand the insurance issues, understand the intricacies of our contracts we have with our employees, and how that affects the bottom line. I mean, these are the things that I think they need to understand. I mean,
Right.
some of these are
Right. And I think that's too what Lindsay wants us to be very careful then what we're sharing with lay people and committees too. Because I think then you can get into that whole privacy piece.
Correct.
So I think, it's a little bit of that as you described. So now we are sharing, we just got to be very careful what we're allowing others to see that are not board officials. And I'm not sure what that looks like, but I think some of that, just making sure that we are very careful about those areas. So I think we're there. So I appreciate the fact that we want to strengthen our model of engagement. We want to make sure that we put some safeguards in place, and that we're getting results, and that people who are working with us and choose to feel that their work is valued and needed, and have the ability to report out and give feedback in the way that task force. That's why I like task force, because those people are working, they're getting information, and they have a big opportunity to report back to the board about what they've worked on. It's temporary.
And it's
They know-
terrific,
it is
because then when we get to learn all this stuff we didn't know, it gives us what we need to do.
It gives you what you need
Yeah,
to do,
right,
and then they go away and get another little group. So just the people that are working ongoing, just make sure we're very clear about our selection of who that we have on a team, and then the what do we want them to do, and then the accountability, or how often do we want the reporting. So I think it's good. I just don't
And
want.
each committee and each task force will have its own parameters.
Well, that's-
We don't need to define it in the policy, right?
Correct.
What we're saying in the
Yes.
policy is that we will be defining those
Exactly,
things.
yeah, I don't think we should,
Yeah.
we need to have it loose enough that you have some flexibility, so everything is not scripted in the committee. I agree.
Absolutely.
Okay,
I agree.
so.
Okay.
Well, actually, we're close to 10 o'clock,
Oh, wow.
and we have an executive session that we need to do after this. Can we, okay, so we're not gonna vote on this. Can I ask my peers if this is acceptable? Jody and I meet with Dr. Dixon on Friday. If there's big things or concerns, would you get in touch with one of us, so then we can bring that forward to Dr. Dixon, and then bring a clean draft to our next meeting? And
Right, can I suggest something? If we can get the clean draft by Friday, so we can just send to Lindsay. We just say, here's Lindsay, this is what we decided, and we just send it to her. And then her to send back the clean draft for you guys to look at. Because right now, we know the concerns, like with Molly, I think, just flipping it a couple words around. If we think that's it, we'll send it to Lindsay the next couple days and say, hey, Lindsay, here's, based on your concerns, because we're almost there.
I think
How
we're
about,
super close.
yeah, just flip
Yeah.
these two, with this, get it, and she said, yeah, we're good, then we got it, we're voting.
Yeah.
so when it comes to wordsmithing, Malia, you have,
Damn English degree.
you are adding value to this process. And you're an equal to us, and you've got concerns.
Yeah.
You're gonna vote on something you think is right, and I admire that. So I think what needs to get done is, can you look, okay, so you spent a lot of time rewording and
Yeah.
adjusting.
And frankly, what Lindsay did to my version is absolutely fine. I've
Okay.
got really no objections. I just want to consider, and I think really you need to get that last sentence to where you want it to be.
Yeah.
And that's the and or a switch. And either one
I'm okay with the and/or.
Yeah,
I
so.
mean, if we're okay with the and/or, then let's go with
Just
what.
Go in and sit, right,
Yeah.
sit, make your
Yeah.
changes.
I mean, I can't actually do it
Well,
on this machine
right.
because I can't download
Right, and
the
if you
Word
send
file. I
it
have to do it on my
right,
real
send it to
computer.
Paul,
Yeah.
any other, and then we get it to Lindsay tomorrow.
Okay, so,
One more thing.
Okay.
If you don't mind. There's, some of Lindsay's language here talks about, let me find it, where's a good way to put it? Second to the last,
Which policy, citizens or standing?
standing,
Oops.
citizens
Just lost,
standing.
I mean, sorry, task force or standing committees.
When a committee is ready to submit a final report on the outcome of its assigned topic, the superintendent shall arrange a meeting for the purpose of receiving the report. The final report must be in writing. Superintendent shall arrange a board meeting. I want the word, a board.
Can't
Where
get
is
it
that
here.
again?
Well, I think what it's saying is if someone is gonna make a report, I think the superintendent should see it before the board sees it.
Okay, but it doesn't,
Is that, I think
it
that's the
doesn't say that the
interpretation.
board shall see it. That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
It
so
doesn't say
that
the board.
before last paragraph.
Yeah, it doesn't say in there that the board will see it.
so it's so it's highly, so I think from just kind of a procedural perspective, a task force, I think it's very odd that a board member would sit on a task force unless there's some accelerated thing going on. So I think we're trying to accelerate our facilities conversation, so having some board members act in an ex officio capacity
Mhm.
for the preschool task force, I think makes a lot of sense. Normally, there would really not be any board members on any of those task forces. But for these standing committees, you'd have board members on there. So those
Yeah.
board members would be
Yeah.
privileged to have those documents and reports. And they should be shared amongst, I mean, it's public, they're public meetings.
Got
I
it.
mean, all these meetings are
Got it.
public. So, yeah, so how Dr. Dixon or Dr. Dixon's replacement or surrogate chooses to present that to the board, I think is up to the superintendent. That's no problem.
So a good example is, so for our Heights, the committee, the Heights School
That's coalition.
Foundation, right?
Schools Foundation, yes.
Heights Schools Foundation, give a report, right?
She gives a report.
She comes with, but she usually sends that to me and she gives that to me in writing,
In advance.
right, in advance, and then comes presented.
Got it.
I believe that's what that's intent is. The intent is for the superintendent to have an opportunity to read it, and I may say, you know what? I know the board and the committee, we need X, Y, there's some things missing before. I don't want anyone to present something to the board without the superintendent had a chance to see it and vet it to make sure it is what we need before it comes to you. And I think, in my mind, that's what that language allows it to do. I hope it's not interpreted that the superintendent gets something and then it's not shared. I think the assumption is that it will be shared with the board, but the superintendent,
Does that?
yeah, the superintendent gets it only so he or she can make sure it is of value, of quality,
Okay.
et cetera.
Yeah, it says such status reports may be made in writing or orally at the board meeting. So it may be made in writing or orally at the board meeting. When a committee is ready to submit a final report, the outcome of its assigned topic, the superintendent shall arrange a meeting for the purpose of receiving the report. The final report must be in writing.
Right.
So it actually doesn't,
Fiddle with that.
it actually doesn't spell out that it will be presented to the board.
Correct, but what I'm saying is I think it would be my assumption. So if someone is giving me a final report, then I think the superintendent should make a determination to say, okay, here's the final report that we received from Committee X, shared with the board members. Committee X is going to present this at the such and such board meeting.
But it does talk about the superintendent or board president shall coordinate all communication between the committee and the board.
Yeah.
So it talks about having that option of communicating.
Right. I just think I think it's important that there's a line of separation between the board and management on these reports. So if a committee or someone is providing something, a report about something, I believe management should have first eyes at it, right? And then the management team is then forwarding that to the board, or either they're going back to that committee and said, you guys forgot several significant things that I know the board is going to want to know. So what that looks like in this policy, we can kind of shape. But I don't think it's healthy for a committee to present findings to all of us without management being able to look at it to make sure it is of quality.
So maybe that, we can just say, I mean, the final report must be made in writing to the board and submitted to the board. Earlier drafts, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I don't see, I'm not reading anything in this policy
Yeah,
that requires
right.
the board to receive the final
Yeah,
report.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think there's really any final report. I mean, so for example, like the advocacy committee, I mean, I think
there
We-
should be, though, for the reason I think at the end of the year, it may be, here's all the things that the advocacy committee could, that's what they've done at this year. And that final report is given to the board to say, we have done these 10 things. Because what it would do, in my mind, it kind of holds Scott and I, we accomplished some things this year. We did some things, and there is a final report. Now, what that
Well-
looks like, and
then that would be like an annual
annual
report.
report,
Because
okay.
the final
Okay, yeah,
report sounds as if it's going to be,
Before being
Gotcha.
dissolved.
Okay, gotcha.
Right.
Okay, I
Here's the
get
thing.
it. Okay.
But
The
here's the
wording,
thing,
the wording.
if I can, the start of this paragraph says, the board and the superintendent shall assign specific tasks to each standing committee. I read the final report as the final report on that task. So let's take pre-K.
Okay.
So the Facilities Commission, Standing Committee, is given the task of studying one location or multiple locations. They do this study, they produce a final report on that topic.
so I think that's a bad example.
Okay,
Because that's a task force. That's followed under -1. A standing committee, we'd never have a standing committee to do, well, I don't think we'd ever standing committee to do the preschool. I mean, the standing committee is something that is intentionally ongoing,
okay.
where the members of that committee either are cycling on or cycling off, and they have an understanding of, for example, what self-insured means, okay? So you don't have to, explain that every time,
Okay,
and why that's sort of a gold standard when it comes to, providing, health insurance. So everybody would get that and understand it. I see possibly an annual report of what
Okay.
they did. But, part of this is, like a lay finance committee, I'm not sure what they would really be reporting out. There may be some thing where, Scott asks, well, do you bless my finances? I mean, do you understand them? The only time we voted ever at the lay finance committee was a vote for a levy millage. I'm not sure.
okay, I was just misunderstood. I thought that something like the pre-K study would be done by the Facilities Task Force because it's such an important piece of the overall facilities picture.
And that policy, I think, dictates that there is a final report.
Okay,
Which one are you, which policy are you
Right.
on? Standing or task
I'm
force?
thinking standing, because there's listed in standing, there is
Facilities.
a facilities, standing facilities committee. that to me could be assigned, as we go down to that one paragraph, members of that facilities committee, the board and or superintendent shall assign specific tasks to each citizens standing committee.
Okay, I see where you're at. I don't see us using the standing committee to do the facilities work for phase two.
Cool.
I mean, maybe we need to talk about it a little bit, but,
Yeah.
I don't see it that way because there's, it's not, I think we have, if we had a facilities committee, it would be to continually, everybody on this committee understands, like what you've asked for, how good is the roof at Canterbury? So when you
Yeah.
step on this committee in year one, it's got a 10-year lifespan. In year 5, if you've been on this committee, that roof's got 5 years to go. And didn't we fix a patch on this? That's the kind of work.
So things like pre-K, we're going to use instead, we're talking about using Citizens Task Force for
Correct.
pre-K. What about things like bus garage? What about things like, are we going to reduce the number of elementary schools that we have? These are
Right.
facilities,
Facilities,
core
right.
to the facilities discussion, but really significant sub
Right.
topics.
So, can I answer this? Okay, so this is citizens committees.
Those are, all three of those you would say would be citizens committee?
No, I do not say that there's citizens committees, except for the fact that there's things where Dr. Dixon wanted some input from citizens on how we were going about making some decisions. One of them was, how do you address the preschool? Okay? I think things relating to phase 2 facilities and the process that we've put into that, that's us and it's staff.
Got it.
Okay? I think there's feedback, you thought the preschool was such an important issue.
Right.
And how it fit into our other decision-making.
Right.
That was sort of a good way of starting to get community members involved in that decision. So I think that is,
You're right.
I
Yeah.
think that's good
Right.
for the superintendent to be part of that. I also think it's good that since board members can be a part of it, and we need to rush through a decision on this, not rush, but we need to make a decision,
Yeah.
get them involved.
Okay.
But things like the bus garage, I think that is something that we really wouldn't be looking.
I think,
the
right, and I
committees.
think that's why we came up with that executive team. So you have that executive committee who are board and staff.
And working with VAA.
And working with VAA.
Right.
On, right, and then.
So many moving
right,
parts to keep
but there
track of.
may-
Sometimes
yeah, right,
things
but-
get jumbled in my head.
Yeah,
I think we need to, I'm gonna suggest that we table this. It's getting
Yeah.
even extra late, and
I can't focus on this anymore. I
Well,
get it. I
yeah.
just can't.
Yeah.
I think we have.
I'm not gonna make a
Let me,
big
let me
decision.
look at the last 2 paragraphs after I've had some sleep.
Yeah, and I think we're all.
Yeah.
I think there's some gray areas here that I think we all need to make sure we're much more aligned with. So I think it's good that we pause, give it some more time.
Good.
We'll think of a strategy on Wednesday. Malia, wordsmith as you think necessary.
Right.
And then hopefully by Friday, we'll be able to give you something to Lindsay, and then we can kind of talk about everything else.
yeah.
And this
Or
is
if we
gonna
can
re-
if we can move it up one step though, if today is Tuesday, if you can work on it tomorrow, Malia, we could send it to Paul tomorrow, and Lindsay can have it ready for our meeting on Friday.
Fair enough, which
Okay.
then we can get it off to you guys
Exactly.
for further feedback.
For further feedback.
Love that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay,
So,
This is gonna replace the original policy, right?
correct.
Right.
Yeah, these two.
Yeah.
So we'll be nixing the original one and replacing it
And
with 2
replacing it
separate
with this, right.
policies.
Okay.
okay, I think it's important we still go into executive session
I do
tonight.
too.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
choose
I do
to
Yeah.
make it short or
Yes.
long.
Yeah, be sure. Yeah. Thank you.
So, do I have a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing an employee Personnel issue?
So moved.
Second.
Call the vote.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Bosch?
Yes.
Mr. Hines?
Yes.
Ms. Serena?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Yes.